Chapter 1619. It had to be said that devouring the black fire was a long and arduous task for Xiaohua. It would take a very long time. Moreover, it was now a crucial moment. Under such circumstances, Xiaoyang did not dare to disturb it. If something really went wrong, it would be too late for regrets. Since he could not control Xiaohua to help him solve this problem, Xiaoyang was not afraid in the slightest. It would just make the battle a little more difficult. At this moment, Luo Ku's eyes suddenly emitted a chilling aura. He waved the profound ice sword in his hand. It was just a simple slash, but a huge ice sword shadow appeared and slashed down on Yi Qingyu's head. When he saw the huge ice sword descending, Xiaoyang snorted coldly. He activated the silver lightning spear with all his might. Immediately, the power of thunder and lightning surged out continuously. He was also fearless as he charged forward. Rumble! Under the bombardment of the power of thunder and lightning, cracks appeared on the seemingly huge ice sword. Moreover, it was shattering at an extremely fast speed. However, after the ice shattered, it turned into icicles and launched a second attack. When Xiaoyang saw this, he snorted. The power in his body surged out once again. Layer after layer of light screens appeared continuously. Only then did he manage to block all the attacks. It could be said that the fight between the two of them was not that intense. However, every time they fought, it was very dangerous. It could be said that there was a hidden killing intent. If one of them was a little careless, they might really be killed. Even Bai Jian's expression could not help but change slightly. He said, "This Luo Ku's growth over the past few years is really terrifying. If I hadn't broken through, I'm afraid that I wouldn't be his match." When he heard this, Li Chunyi's expression changed drastically. Bai Jian was the #1 genius in the Sky Sword realm. His strength was also at the top. Now, even he was not Luo Ku's match. Then, just how strong was Luo Ku? Moreover, the battle had just begun. Both sides had not displayed their true strength. Wasn't it a little too early to say this now? At this moment, Xiaoyang relied on the 7 steps of the barbaric steps to move nimbly. He did not give Luo Ku any chance to lock onto him. After all, if there was even the slightest mistake, if there was another fierce attack, then he would really be unable to withstand it. Luo Ku was still standing at the same spot. At the same time, his eyes were constantly searching the surroundings. His divine sense was also constantly locking onto Xiaoyang's position. However, Xiaoyang's speed was too fast. It was not so easy to lock onto him. Moreover, every time Xiaoyang's foot landed, it would be accompanied by the shattering of space and the surging of power. It was impossible to be precise. When he took his 7th step, Xiaoyang suddenly appeared in front of Luo Ku. Traceless dream! Xiaoyang looked at Luo Ku and immediately used this technique that he had been using for a long time. Immediately, Luo Ku, who was caught off guard, was hit as well. His expression became dazed. At the same time, the silver lightning spear in Xiaoyang's hand pierced towards his chest. Ding-ling-ling. The sound kept ringing out. Under the power of the spear tip, the profound ice spear kept shattering. The sound was very crisp. The ice armor was very tough. Even when faced with a saint-level magic treasure, it would not shatter immediately. It was clear how terrifyingly tough it was. Xiaoyang only had this opportunity for a moment. However, because his opponent had the ice machine, he could not succeed at all. This was because Luo Ku had already returned to normal. Endless icy aura surged out of his body. The profound ice sword in his hand was also mercilessly slashing towards the waist. Boom! At this moment, the power of the spear tip exploded. At the same time, Xiaoyang used the force of the impact to forcefully retreat. The explosion of power also caused Luo Ku to take a few steps back. A crack appeared on the ice armor in front of his chest. Barbarian god's finger. Xiaoyang pointed with his left hand. Immediately, an extremely tyrannical power turned into finger intent and hit the hole in Luo Ku's chest. Suddenly, Luo Ku's expression changed. He looked at his chest that had been pierced. At this moment, his expression also changed a little. Xiao Yang could not continue to attack, because his move was already exhausted. He could only stand on the spot and watch, regulating his own strength. Seeing this move, everyone present was a little stunned. Xiao Yang's combination of martial skills was a little too strong. Generally speaking, it was not easy for a cultivator to control two martial skills at the same time to launch an attack. However, Xiao Yang had used 4 martial skills in a row. Even Jiang Zhangqing and Dawang, who were standing above, were stunned. No matter what, they would never have thought that a young man could actually cultivate martial skills to such a proficient level. It was truly somewhat inconceivable. There aren't any profound martial skills. That's why he can be so proficient. If the power of the martial skills were a little stronger, or if the level of the martial skills was a little higher, the victor might have already been decided. De Wang said with a little regret, the power of this combination of martial skills was actually not too bad. However, Luo Ku was wearing the profound ice armor. It was really too tough. That was why Xiao Yang did not succeed. However, to be able to gain some advantages was already a very difficult thing to do. Jiang Zhangqing chuckled. If all of them were profound martial skills, Xiao Yang would still be able to display extraordinary control. That would be a heaven-defying existence. However, to be able to use 4 Earth-grade martial skills together so proficiently among the God Realms Kingwu, there were probably only a handful of people who could do it. Even if they could do it, they would probably be some old monsters. If it was not for the polishing of time, it would be impossible for him to be so proficient. However, the current Xiaoyang was still very young. One had to admit that this was a very amazing feat. A hint of anger flashed across Luo Ku's face. His face was no longer as cold and calm as before. He never thought that he would be at a disadvantage in the hands of Xiaoyang. At the same time, he felt a little weak in his heart. The mental attack was really a little sinister. If he was not careful, he would be hit. Therefore, he had to be careful and did not dare to make the slightest mistake. After coming to the God Realm, you're the first person to hurt me. Luo Ku looked calm, but there was an uncontrollable anger in his tone. At this point, Luo Ku's mentality had also undergone some subtle changes. At the same time, there was a slight change in the way he looked at Xiao Yang. Chapter 1620. Xiao Yang was a little disappointed that his combo was not able to seriously injure Luo Ku. He had already controlled every step very well, but he was just a little bit away from succeeding. He had to admit that Luo Ku's strength was indeed very strong. Even his reaction was very fast. Back then, Xiao Yang was able to easily defeat Hu Jianming because of his traceless dream. However, when it came to Luo Ku, he had added a little more strength, but he was still unable to seriously injure him. The broken ice armor on Luo Ku's body was also restored to its original state due to a chill, as if it was not damaged at all. However, the dark red blood on his chest could not be stopped by the ice armor. Even if Luo Ku was not seriously injured, no matter how strong his body was, after being hit by the barbarian god's finger, he would definitely not feel good. Therefore, this move was not completely useless. At least it had injured Luo Ku, which was enough to show that his ice armor was not unbreakable. Luo Ku waved the sword in his hand. Immediately, his aura rose once again, and an even sharper chilling aura gathered around him. A terrifying aura continued to erupt from him. Luo Ku was indeed angry now. Originally, he thought that Xiao Yang was an opponent that he could deal with a little effort. However, now it seemed that although Luo Ku was a genius from a remote place, his strength was not weak either. Therefore, he could not be careless in this regard. Senior, is Xiao Yang's victory already in his grasp? Li Chuanyi asked curiously when he saw the situation. Bai Jian smiled and shook his head when he heard this. He said, "It's still too early to say this. However, after Xiao Yang broke through to King Wu level 8, his strength has indeed made a qualitative leap. His only shortcoming now is that it has not been long since he broke through to level 8. Otherwise, Luo Ku would definitely not be his match." Hearing this, the corners of Li Chunyi's mouth could not help but twitch slightly. If Xiaoyang had reached the full circle of King Wu level 8, how strong would he become? You don't have to be discouraged. I have also suffered many setbacks before. It was only when I broke through to level 9 that I understood that we need the support of our realm. The difference of one level is the difference between heaven and earth. Bai Jian saw that Li Chunyi was a little depressed, so he opened his mouth to comfort him. From Bai Jian's point of view, no matter what cultivation technique it was, it had a unique point of power. Different cultivation methods would erupt in different realms. For example, the cultivators of the Heaven Sword realm, only after reaching the 9th level Martial King realm did they understand what it meant to be sharp and look down on the world. Li Chunyi nodded as if he understood. However, the 9th level Martial King realm was still a long way away for him. It could be said that in their generation to break through to level 9 to break through to level. Even in the entire Heaven Sword realm, only one 9th stage cultivator would appear in 1,000 years. Xiao Yang let out a low roar and once again waved the silver lightning spear in his hand, preparing to launch the next round of attacks. Since he did not succeed in severely injuring Luo Ku earlier, Xiao Yang was bound to prepare for the next round of attacks. Moreover, it would be even fiercer than before. Only then would he have a chance. When Luo Ku saw that Xiao Yang was ignoring him and preparing for the next round of attacks, he waved the black ice sword in his hand again. His expression became even colder. Even the arena was covered in a thin layer of frost because of Luo Ku. However, just as Luo Ku was about to launch his attack, he suddenly felt a huge pressure. When he looked up, he saw a huge mountain pressing down on him. Since his opponent's defense was so terrifying, Xiao Yang did not need to be polite and immediately used the Heavenly Qin Mountain. Luo Ku's ice armor was comparable to a saint-level weapon. It was also because of this that Xiao Yang had to suppress his opponent. When Luo Ku felt the weapon pressing down on him, he snorted coldly. Immediately, a wave of frost shot up into the sky. In an instant, the frost turned into an ice dragon and charged towards the Heavenly Qin Mountain. Wherever the ice dragon passed, an intense pressure crazily spread. Even space itself was about to be frozen. Rumble! The ice dragon crashed into the Heavenly Qin Mountain. Immediately, a huge shock wave spread out. At the same time, countless ice shards appeared and danced in the air. Even though the ice dragon was very powerful, the Heavenly Qin Mountain was a saint-level weapon. Coupled with Xiao Yang's control, it had the upper hand for a moment. However, it was difficult to completely suppress it. At the same time, Luo Ku moved again. He waved the profound ice sword in his hand. Luo Ku's posture when he waved the sword looked very elegant. It was as if he was performing a sword dance. There was no lethality at all. Even the bone-piercing chill was restrained at this moment. Xiao Yang raised his eyebrows slightly when he suddenly had such a strange feeling. He felt that things were not as simple as they seemed. At this moment, he once again used the 7 steps of the barbarian god, making his body agile. Xiao Yang did not know what the other party was up to. However, one thing was certain, and that was that there must be a hidden killing move. Therefore, he had to be on guard. Watching the people of the Sun-Snow realm fight really requires patience, the king said with some emotion when he saw the situation. Jiang Zhangqing also stroked his long beard and said with a smile, "It's not just the people we watch who need patience. The people who are fighting with them need even more patience. The techniques and moves of the Sun-Snow realm are like this. They are mainly feminine and seem very slow. However, there is a hidden killing intent. If you are anxious, you will fall into the trap. The king shrugged helplessly. He was also clear about this. When he went out to train when he was young, he was also an impatient person. Therefore, after the battle with the geniuses of the Sun-Snow realm, he lost because of his impatience. Therefore, his temper became much more relaxed. However, although Xiaoyang moves like the wind and moves like a raging fire, he doesn't seem to be anxious at all. Who knows, he might really have a chance to win, Jiang Zhangqing said. The king raised his eyebrows slightly when he heard this. However, it was still hard to say what the outcome would be. If Xiaoyang could maintain his mentality, there would naturally be no problem. However, if he was anxious, then it would be over. 1,000 Miles of Mysterious Ice. Chapter 16:21. Following Luo Ku's low shout, he waved the profound ice sword in his hand. Immediately, wave after wave of sword intent surged out and attacked Xiaoyang. However, these sword intents were different from the sharpness of the white sword. Every sword intent that was slashed out was condensed into profound ice. Although it looked less sharp, it added a bit of coldness. Wherever the profound being passed, a thick layer of frost would condense. Wherever the profound ice passed, the air would be frozen. It could be seen how terrifying its power was. Even if the profound ice couldn't kill you, the coldness contained in it was enough to turn you into an ice sculpture and make you unable to move. Seeing the profound ice continuously attacking him, Xiaoyang's expression couldn't help but change drastically. As the person who was the most targeted, he also felt the incomparably huge pressure. Even though the attack had yet to reach him, his hands and feet were affected to a certain extent and were somewhat stiff. Facing such an overwhelming attack, Xiaoyang didn't dare to hesitate at all. He continued to use the 7 steps of the barbaric steps, trying his best to make his movement technique as agile as possible. He wanted to avoid as many waves of attacks as possible. At the same time, the silver lightning spear in his hand also surged out. For a moment, countless lightning bolts continuously surged out, almost completely enveloping Xiaoyang. Ka-cha-cha! The sound of the spear colliding with the profound ice continuously rang out, one after another. It was the sound of the spear and the profound ice shattering. Even though Xiaoyang could dodge some of the attacks with the help of the 7 steps of the barbaric steps, he couldn't dodge all of them because the range of the attacks was too wide. It could even be said that there was no way to dodge them. Therefore, Xiaoyang could only rely on his own strength to forcefully withstand these attacks. He didn't dare to make the slightest mistake. Luo Ku was still waving the profound ice sword, and the profound ice sword chi rose and fell one after another. If this continued, it would probably be endless. This move is really insidious. If Xiaoyang was anxious, I'm afraid this battle would be over. Bai Jian couldn't help but sigh. Such a situation could be said to be impossible to guard against. By the side, Li Chunyi had also seen through some of the mysteries. The more he watched, the more fearful he felt. This genius from the sun-snow boundary was truly tyrannical and could not be underestimated. Even Jiang Feiyun, who had yet to leave, had his face twitching slightly. The final battle had yet to begin, but they had already displayed their trump card. It was truly incomprehensible. At the same time, Jiang Feiyun was calculating his chances of winning against the two of them. Whether it was Xiaoyang's combination martial skill or Luo Ku's 1,000 miles of black ice, there did not seem to be any good ways to deal with them. At least in Jiang Feiyun's mind, he didn't have a perfect answer. It could be said that Xiaoyang was having a headache right now. He was even hit in the chest due to a moment of carelessness. A wound instantly appeared on his chest, and the powerful chill spread directly, preparing to freeze him. Fortunately, Xiaoyang's strength was relatively strong, so he was able to forcefully suppress it and not be frozen directly. However, it was also very strenuous for him to hold on until now. If there were no changes, he was afraid that he would be defeated in this endless exhaustion. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang also snorted coldly. Immediately, a powerful force gathered, and his spirit underwent a huge change. That tyrannical aura was no longer concealed as it completely erupted. Now, even if Xiaoyang wanted to hide his strength, he would not be allowed to do so. If he continued to hold back, he was afraid that he would really be defeated. Therefore, the current stalemate had to be broken. Young people are still too impulsive after all. They are too anxious. Jiang Zhongqing sighed helplessly when he saw the situation. De Wang also nodded in agreement. He had fought with the geniuses from the sun's snow boundary before, so he naturally knew how powerful they were. Only when one's state of mind was stable could one find an opportunity to counterattack. If one forcefully counterattacked because they were anxious, they would probably fall into the trap and reveal even more flaws. When he felt that Xiaoyang's aura had become extremely tyrannical in an instant, Luo Ku's face did not show any fear. Instead, there was a proud expression on his face. It was as if everything was within his expectations. The seventh step. When the last step of the 7 steps of the barbarian god landed, Xiaoyang unleashed all of his aura and power. Immediately, the layer of ice that was condensed on the arena cracked. It was extremely domineering. His body, and even the entire ring, began to shake because of this kick. If it weren't for the support of the array, the entire ring would have collapsed directly. Not only his feet, but even the ice that was flying in the air paused because of the aura of this step. When Luo Ku saw this scene, he was also stunned. Had Xiaoyang's strength become so tyrannical? However, it was only a momentary hesitation. In the next moment, Luo Ku continued to wave the ice sword in his hand, and countless ice continued to surge out. Earthly Aura Azure Dragon. When Xiaoyang took the last step, he also secretly used this move. His power seeped into the arena and continued to advance. Suddenly, a tyrannical force erupted from beneath Luo Ku's feet. Luo Ku's entire body was instantly sent flying. Xiaoyang also roared angrily. He allowed the ice to continuously bombard his body as he charged towards Luo Ku. It was not easy for him to create this opportunity to break this stalemate. Naturally, he would not give it up. In fact, he had to seize this opportunity. This was the only way to determine the victor. Even though this method was a little risky, he had no choice but to do it. When they saw Xiaoyang's actions, many people's expressions changed drastically. He's really amazing. He doesn't care about his personal gains and losses and wants to determine the victor. Young people these days are really crazy. I'm afraid only hot-blooded people can support such a method of fighting. Jiang Zhongqing also sighed. He looked at his white beard and shook his head helplessly. There was also a sense of self-mockery. They could not do such a crazy method. Even De Wang was shocked. This was because he did not expect this situation. This Xiaoyang was so bold. Chapter 16:22. Luo Ku was sent flying in the air. His heart was also filled with shock. He had withstood the violent tremors without moving an inch, but he did not expect that there was still a hidden move behind it. It had directly shaken him up, causing him to almost lose control of his body. Originally, he thought that with the black ice blocking him, he would be safe. At least, Xiaoyang would not take the risk to come over. However, when he heard the sound of the black ice hitting his body, he was speechless. Was this guy really not concerned about the gains and losses? That was indeed the case. Xiaoyang relied on the strength of his physical body and allowed these mysterious ice to hit his body. Xiaoyang used his protective treasures and skills, in addition to King Wu's level 8 physical strength, and chose to forcefully endure it. Even though Xiaoyang's body was very tough, it was inevitable that he would be injured when faced with the attacks of the black ice. However, now was not the time to be calculative. The opportunity was fleeting, so Xiaoyang directly rushed in front of Luo Ku. He directly stabbed his spear at Luo Ku's lower abdomen. Before the spear reached him, the lightning energy began to explode, and the ice armor also began to shatter. The huge force also scattered the energy that Luo Ku had gathered with great difficulty, causing him to fly in the air like a kite with a broken string. Immediately after, Xiaoyang followed up with a silver lightning spear, continuously attacking Luo Ku's body. Even though Luo Ku had the protection of the ice armor and could not cause any obvious injuries to his body, such attacks were enough to cause him serious internal injuries, even if they could not quickly end the battle. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, became more and more courageous as the battle went on. His speed also became faster and faster. He constantly landed and rushed up, causing Luo Ku's entire body to be suspended in the air. He could not land and stabilize his body at all. Seeing Xiaoyang's crazy attacks, the corners of many people's mouths twitched. This guy was really fierce. He was completely hanging Luo Ku up and beating him up. Even Li Chuanyi couldn't bear to watch this. This kind of fighting style was really a little unbearable and torturous. Haha, although this tortoise shell is sturdy, it is unable to withstand all of the impact. If I had thought of this method back then, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Bai Jian hesitated for a moment and was somewhat at a loss for words. After all, in order to accomplish what Xiaoyang did, one would need to have a strong and solid power as a backing. Although Bai Jian was extremely sharp, he did not possess such rich power. There were gains and losses. It could be said that Bai Jian had lost because of the ice armor. When Li Chuanyi heard these words, he helplessly let out a bitter laugh. As a member of the same sect, he was naturally aware of their flaws. Xiaoyang's rapid attacks lasted for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. He landed on the ground and panted heavily. Clearly, he was exhausted. At the same time, there were many wounds on his body, and blood was constantly flowing out. At this moment, Luo Ku finally landed on the ground. However, when he landed, the ice armor that enveloped him shattered inch by inch. Right now, Luo Ku's skin was no longer as white as it was before. Because he had been beaten up like that, his body was covered in bruises, making him look extremely miserable. Even his snow-white collar was dyed black because of the mouthful of black blood that he spat out. It was very conspicuous. It could be said that Luo Ku was now in a daze after being beaten up. His entire person had become somewhat unwell, and his consciousness was in a complete mess. Now, Luo Ku's heart was also very gloomy. He had never imagined that he would be subjected to such barbaric treatment. These countless strikes had caused his internal organs to suffer quite a bit of impact, and they were all shattered. Even though his bones were tough, cracks had already appeared under the impact of such a huge force. If it were not for the strength of the ice armor, he would have been beaten to death long ago. Suddenly, the scene became quiet. No one had thought that Xiaoyang would use such a method to break his opponent's defense and suppression. Such a crazy action could be said to be completely disregarding his own gains and losses. At this moment, Xiaoyang was also very uncomfortable. The remaining power of the ice armor had also begun to take effect. The chill was also constantly swimming around his body, and the blood in his body seemed to be about to be frozen. A layer of frost had even appeared on his face. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the chill was. Are you still going to fight or not? Xiaoyang held the silver lightning spear with both hands and shouted. After hearing the shout, Luo Ku became much more clear-headed. He struggled to stand up and looked at the incomparably miserable Xiaoyang, and his heart was also incomparably angry. In his anger, he directly spat out a mouthful of black blood. His body went limp, and he almost fell again. All the bones in Luo Ku's body had been shattered, and it was very difficult for him to stand up now. However, he was still unwilling to admit defeat. He was waiting for Xiaoyang to be completely frozen by the ice armor. At least now, it seemed that Xiaoyang did not have much fighting strength left. He naturally had to pay a price for such a crazy action. It could be said that the two of them were almost competing with their willpower to see who could last until the other collapsed. The onlookers also raised their eyebrows. From their point of view, the two of them were evenly matched in terms of strength. As for who would admit defeat, they did not know. However, When they saw that Xiao Yang's legs were almost frozen, they felt that the outcome might have been decided. What a pity! Xiao Yang's last move was indeed powerful. He used brute force to break through, but he was still one step behind. Jiang Zhangqing could not help but feel a little regretful. De Wang also nodded slightly and said, "This is the result of being anxious." However, he also performed very well. To be able to break through the stalemate in such a way could be said to be very difficult. However, it was a pity that because of the ice armor's characteristics, Xiaoyang was still a little lacking. At this moment, Bai Jian stroked his chin, but there was no trace of nervousness on his face. This was because, in his opinion, Xiaoyang's previous actions were a little too desperate. Therefore, under such circumstances, it was impossible for him to lose. On the other hand, Li Chunyi's expression looked a little regretful. He felt that it was a pity. If Xiaoyang had not encountered a genius from the Sun-Snow realm with a unique attack, he would not have ended up like this. Inch by inch, the ice armor was driven by the chill and continuously eroded Xiaoyang's body. Moreover, it was still constantly freezing. Seeing that the ice armor's freezing speed did not slow down, Luo Ku felt a lot more at ease. He was going to win in the end. Chapter 16:23. Xiaoyang watched as the mysterious ice continued to form on his body. He furrowed his brows slightly. It was as though he was helpless in the face of such a freezing situation. Many people sighed. Against the cultivators from the Sun-Snow realm, one could not afford to be impatient. Even though Xiaoyang was rough, he was still one step behind. He was unable to turn the situation around. That was why he was being restricted like this, and there was nothing he could do. Luo Ku's expression did not look as angry as before. Instead, he was somewhat calm. As long as Xiaoyang was completely frozen, he would naturally be able to obtain victory. At the same time, Luo Ku was also very surprised. Although he had some understanding of Xiaoyang, he never thought that his strength would be so tyrannical. If Xiaoyang had been just a little bit stronger, the person who would have lost the battle would have been him. Do you think you already have victory in your grasp? This mysterious ice is indeed powerful, but it's impossible for it to seal me at this level. Xiaoyang suddenly laughed and said. In the next moment, Xiaoyang let out a low roar. Immediately, the power of the silver lightning spear in his hand surged out and continuously attacked his body. The mysterious ice also quickly began to shatter and peel off. Immediately, everyone could not help but gasp. The situation could be said to have taken a turn for the worse at this moment. No one dared to believe their eyes. Even the joy in Luo Ku's heart turned into nothingness at this moment. He even became very depressed. How was this possible? After experiencing so many extreme attacks, how could Xiaoyang still have such majestic spiritual energy to resist the freezing of the mysterious ice? Luo Ku did not know that Xiaoyang was at the level 8 Kingwu realm, so his spiritual energy was doubled. There was still a big difference between them. It was also because of this that Xiaoyang's spiritual energy was thicker than theirs. I lost. Luo Ku helplessly shook his head and said, even though Luo Ku was unwilling to admit this fact, the reality was right in front of him. He had no choice but to admit it. Xiaoyang's strength had indeed exceeded his expectations. Even if they continued fighting with Luo Ku's current condition, it would indeed be very difficult for him to contend against Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang wins. When Jiang Zhangqing announced the results, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. From his point of view, among the 3,000 small worlds, the spiritual energy of the cultivators from the realm of the gods was the richest. However, compared to Xiaoyang, it seemed that there was a huge gap between them. It had to be said that this fellow was truly a monster. Exactly how much power was contained in his body was still an unknown. It was difficult to estimate. No one had expected that Luo Ku, the most popular contender for the championship, would actually lose. He had lost to Xiaoyang, whom no one was optimistic about in the beginning. How much strength had he hidden to be able to do this? When Bai Jian saw this, the corners of his mouth curled into a gentle smile. He felt that as long as Xiaoyang put out a desperate effort, there was no reason for him to fail. Now, it seemed that after a few years, this fellow's strength had increased by quite a bit. I'm very curious. What kind of cultivation technique are you practicing? How can you still have such rich power after a big battle? Luo Ku was still unwilling to admit defeat and asked. Xiaoyang waved his hand indifferently and said, "The cultivation technique I practice is like this. When I came to the God Realm, I was already half a step away from King Wu level 8. However, it took me more than 2 years to break through." As for what cultivation technique he practiced, Xiaoyang naturally would not tell them the truth. However, these words were enough for them to understand the reason behind it. It could be said that in the God Realm, it was not difficult for Xiaoyang to break through to King Wu level 8. As long as he had a little bit of talent, he could do it. It was also because of this that Xiaoyang did not break through for a long time. In addition, he avoided the Jade Pool Banquet, which made many people think that he was a good-for-nothing. However, now that they thought about it, it seemed that was not the case at all. Xiaoyang's talent was very high, but he could not break through for a long time because of the cultivation technique he practiced. The higher the level of the cultivation technique, the more spiritual energy one needed to accumulate. Therefore, Xiaoyang had been accumulating his spiritual energy all this time. Luo Ku also smiled. He thought that his only opponent this time would be Shin Luo. When he thought about how he would be able to compete with Shin Luo in the last round, he felt very happy. At that moment, Xiaoyang, who had come from nowhere, had defeated him single-handedly. Xiaoyang's strength was truly frightening. Then, Xiaoyang did not waste any time and went down the stage. When he went down, he saw Bai Jian. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Bai Jian quickly walked over and said, "How are your injuries?" "Although the coldness in my body is a little difficult to deal with, I only need 4 hours to completely remove it," Xiaoyang said indifferently. Hearing that, the corner of Bai Jian's mouth twitched. Back then, he had used 20 hours to remove the coldness from his body. However, Xiaoyang only needed 4 hours. Just how big was the difference between them? Bai Jian was also very gloomy. Did these monsters have an explosive period at every level? Then, the two of them chatted for a while before going their separate ways. However, Bai Jian also clearly expressed his attitude. In the next 2 days, he would still come to see Xiaoyang's performance. After returning to the King Manor, Xiaoyang began to remove the coldness with all his strength. This was because almost half of his meridians had been frozen. If he did not remove it as soon as possible, it would inevitably leave behind some hidden dangers in the future. However, there was one thing that made Xiaoyang feel very comfortable. It was that the coldness contained some cold poison. It was a good tonic for him to strengthen his cultivation. If Xiaoyang was not a poison cultivator, he really would not be able to break through the mysterious ice under the cold poison. It was very likely that he would be defeated. On this day, Xiaoyang absorbed the cold poison and expelled the chill from his body. Then he consumed some medicinal pills to recover from his injuries. However, he was not in a hurry to cultivate. Instead, he waited. He was waiting for Yang Sun to come. However, he waited until the next morning and did not see Yang Sun. Although he did not know how serious Yang Sun's injuries were, he already knew that Yang Sun did not come over until now. This Shin Luo was really too much. He did not hold back when he attacked. He actually injured Yang Sun to this extent. It was really hateful. Chapter 16:24. Early the next morning, Xiaoyang followed the coachman to the Black Tortoise Field. He also sat down at the same place. Because it was the second round of the competition, many people came to watch the battle without any complaints. Because of the exciting battle between Xiaoyang and Luo Ku yesterday, many people felt that this battle would also be very exciting. It could be said that the popular contenders for first place, Shin Luo and Zhang Feiyin, had already advanced to this round. The dark horse, Xiaoyang, would also meet him. Hence, many people were looking forward to seeing who would emerge victorious in this battle. After waiting for a long time, the first battle of the day began. It was Shen Ziying versus Shen Luo. Ziying clearly had her own emotions mixed in, so when she faced Shen Luo, she launched a very fierce attack right from the start, not giving him any chance to retaliate. It could be said that as long as the martial skill was powerful enough, Ziying would be able to defeat it easily. Moreover, she did not hold back at all, as if she was attacking with all her might. Seeing such a fierce battle right from the start, everyone was instantly shocked. They never imagined that this ordinary-looking little girl would actually be so powerful. Shen Luo was now fully on guard, but he still seemed to be having a hard time. "The king, I didn't expect Third Miss to be so powerful," Jiang Zhangqing said with a smile. King De smiled and didn't say anything. However, the worry in his eyes couldn't be concealed. Clearly, he was also very worried about his daughter's situation. It wasn't that Ziying's strength was weaker than Shen Luo's. It was just that this little girl hadn't experienced many battles. In addition, her temperament wasn't mature enough. How could she be a match for Shen Luo, who had experienced hundreds of battles? The king felt a little resentful when he thought about how Shen Luo had attacked Jiang Sun so ruthlessly. He naturally knew that the reason why Ziying was so crazy now was because she was angry, so she attacked crazily without caring about the gains and losses. When Li Chuni saw the little girl constantly erupting with powerful strength, his jaw almost dropped to the ground. He had seen Ziying's attacks in the 10 Directions 8 Wasteland map, but they were sparse and there was nothing special about them. However, at that moment, the power that she had unleashed was extraordinary. Even Li Chuni felt that it was a wise choice to forfeit. Otherwise, if he became the little girl's target, he would probably have to lie in bed for a long time. In the 10 Directions 8 Wasteland map, Ziying did not show any strong suppression because she was playful in nature. She almost treated it as a game, so she did not show her true strength. But because of her anger, she did not have any thoughts of hiding her strength. Now, she only had one thought, and that was to beat Shen Luo to avenge her brother. Xiaoyang's expression was slightly changed. Wasteland map. He had only heard of this little girl's strength from Yang Sun's mouth, but now that he saw it, his heart was inevitably very shocked. With such a powerful aura, even Xiaoyang would not dare to go against it. It's true that strength creates miracles. This little girl looks petite and cute. Even I have to retreat when facing such explosive power. Bai Jian could not help but sigh. At the same time, Bai Jian felt that it was a pity because Ziying's strength was not weak, but it was a pity that she did not know how to fight. Therefore, she had suffered a great loss in this aspect. Everyone present knew this very well because Ziying's attacks could be said to be completely disorganized. It was as if she could beat him up however she wanted, doing whatever she wanted. Who knows, I might really be able to kill old master with my fists, Bai Jian added as he thought. Li Chuni was also sweating. Originally, he thought that he would definitely stand out in the realm of the gods' grand competition. But now, it seemed that he was overthinking. The realm of the gods was indeed the strongest existence in the 3,000 small worlds. They already occupied 3 of the top 4 spots, especially Shen Luo, who suppressed all the heroes. Now, Ziying's appearance was even more stunning. Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly and said, "The chances are too small." Although Shen Luo was forced to retreat step by step and was even injured, he was still very steady. If there were any gaps in Ziying's attack, it would be seized by the opponent. It was very normal for Ziying to make a comeback. Right now, Xiaoyang was also very worried, but there was nothing he could do. At this moment, although Shanamo was still able to deal with it, he was secretly suffering in his heart. This little cousin who seemed to be indifferent to worldly affairs and only knew how to play every day actually had such tyrannical strength. This was also something he didn't expect. Now, Ying had completely occupied the upper hand. However, anyone with a little bit of experience would know that this was only temporary. When Ying's strength was almost exhausted, she would not be able to continue. Now, even Ying began to feel anxious in her heart. Because she was unable to defeat her opponent, coupled with her anger, she became even more anxious. It was also because of this that Ying was careless and showed a trace of carelessness. Xinluo also seized the opportunity and immediately launched a counterattack. In an instant, the situation took a turn for the worse. Ying, who was originally suppressing her opponent, was completely at a disadvantage. Xinluo was even more merciless. He slapped several times and directly hit the little girl until she vomited blood. When everyone saw this scene, they could not bear to see it. Xinluo should not be so heavy-handed to a little girl. Now, the one who was most heartbroken was the king. He could not do anything as he watched his daughter being beaten. Xinluo had completely gained the upper hand and seized the opportunity to bombard Ying with his fists like a storm. Most people knew that Ying had lost, and there was no chance for her to make a comeback. However, Xinluo did not stop and continued to attack. Suddenly, Xiaoyang frowned and clenched his fists. This was because he felt that Xinluo was venting his emotions. After thinking about this, Xiaoyang's chest rose and fell slightly. After all, they were blood relatives. How could there be any deep hatred between them? The only explanation was that it was Xiaoyang. Chapter 16:25. It could be said that the current battle had become a one-sided beating for divine confusion. However, due to the rules, no one could stop this from happening. They could only watch helplessly as the situation unfolded. Many people were filled with anger. Xinluo's actions were truly abominable. It was fine if he won against a little girl, but he actually humiliated her like that. It was really ungentlemanly. In the end, Xinluo slapped Ying and sent her flying out of the arena. Xiaoyang's figure flashed when he saw this. He caught the falling Ying in his hand. When he sensed that the little girl's aura was weak and there was practically no part of her body that was unharmed, the anger in his heart became somewhat uncontrollable. This was because Xiaoyang felt that the reason Xinluo was so ruthless to Yongsen and his sister was probably because of him. Since Xinluo was unhappy with him and involved a serum, Xinluo's actions were a little too much. De Wang, who was standing in the sky, emitted a trace of killing intent. Xinluo's actions were like a slap to his face. Jiang Zhongqing frowned slightly when he sensed the killing intent, but he did not say a word. After all, drinking was an internal matter of the imperial family. As an outsider, it was not appropriate for him to say anything. After that, Jiang Zhongqing could only announce Xinluo's victory. However, he didn't say a single word about the outcome of the battle. When Xinluo stepped down from the arena, he glanced at Xiaoyang intentionally or unintentionally. His gaze was filled with provocation. The second round, Zhang Feiyun versus Xiaoyang. Although De Wang was not in a good mood, Jiang Zhongqing still needed to maintain the battle. After Xiaoyang brought Ying back to the small pavilion, he could not help but frown even more when he saw her pained face. He immediately took out a pill and fed it to Ying. "Bai Jian, I'll have to trouble you to take care of Ying," Xiaoyang said softly. Even though Xiaoyang was already doing his best to control his anger, his voice still sounded a little angry. Bai Jian nodded and said, "Don't worry." Then, Xiaoyang leaped up and landed on the arena. Zhang Feiyun stood on the other side. He looked at the infuriated Xiaoyang, then looked at Xinluo, who was below the stage, and frowned slightly, because he could sense that the two of them seemed to have formed some sort of enmity, and he was afraid that it wouldn't be long before they settled the score. At the thought of this, Zhang Feiyun sized up Xiaoyang. He did not know if he should continue with this battle. Zhang Feiyun had clearly seen the battle between Xiaoyang and Luo Ku yesterday. At that time, he was already thinking of a countermeasure. However, the night was fruitless because the strength Xiaoyang displayed was only the tip of the iceberg. In addition, Xiaoyang had lost his mind. He didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. You're in a terrible state right now. Are you sure you want to continue? Jiang Feiyun was not in a hurry to make a move. Instead, he asked with a smile. At this moment, Xiaoyang was very angry. Although he didn't release his aura, his powerful aura was enough to make Jiang Feiyun very afraid. He was also a little uncertain about what to do now. In the next moment, a trace of lightning flashed in Xiaoyang's hand, and the silver lightning spear appeared in his hand. He said, "Of course." Although Xiaoyang was a little angry now, if he wanted to defeat Xin Luo, then he naturally had to defeat Jiang Feiyun first. Therefore, he did not hesitate at all in this aspect. After the silver lightning spear appeared, Jiang Feiyun furrowed his brows slightly. That was because the aura from the silver lightning spear had increased once again. Even he could feel a strong pressure. Of course, Jiang Feiyun also felt another message, which was that Xiaoyang's injuries from yesterday had already healed. It could even be said that Jiang Feiyun was no match for Jiang Feiyun at his peak state. Our strength should be about the same. If we really fight, I'm afraid that tomorrow's battle will be unavoidably affected, Jiang Feiyun said solemnly. As soon as he said that, the onlookers nodded. In their opinion, Jiang Feiyun was the second on the hidden dragon ranking, so there was no need to doubt his strength. As for Xiaoyang, everyone had witnessed his battle with Luo Ku yesterday. Their strength was generally considered to be on par. Xiaoyang did not know what Jiang Feiyun was trying to do, so he was very puzzled. On the other hand, Xin Luo's expression changed slightly. This was because if Jiang Feiyun and Xiaoyang fought hard today, then he would have the advantage tomorrow. However, Jiang Feiyun had always been a calculative person. Now that he said that, people could not help but feel that there was another meaning behind it. What do you want? Xiaoyang asked coldly. Jiang Feiyun shrugged and said, I'll forfeit. Let's make friends. How about that? As soon as he said that, everyone was shocked. Jiang Feiyun, who was one of the favorites to win this time, actually forfeited. It could be said that this outcome was unexpected for many people. Jiang Feiyun's strength was not necessarily much worse than Xiaoyang's. He could even fight Xin Luo, but now he forfeited. Moreover, he said that he forfeited so casually. Xin Luo's expression changed slightly. He knew that Jiang Feiyun did this because he did not want to be the fisherman who reaped the benefits. Jiang Zhongqing was also slightly startled. Soon after, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. The grand competition of the divine realm was in full swing, and everyone was trying their best to advance. However, Jiang Feiyun had given up so easily. However, both father and son felt that this was a very wise decision. Xiaoyang's strength was not weak. If they really fought, it was unknown who would emerge victorious. Even if Jiang Feiyun won by luck, he would not be able to deal with Xin Luo in his peak state tomorrow. Therefore, after thinking about it this way, wouldn't it be perfect to do him a favor? If you and I want to determine the winner, we must each bring out our unique skills. From the battle between you and Luo Ku, I knew that I am not as ruthless as you. Therefore, in the end, my chances of winning are only 30%. Jiang Feiyun said frankly and frankly. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, You belittle yourself like this. You're praising me to death. When Jiang Feiyun heard this, he laughed and did not care about it. He turned around and walked down the arena. Seeing that Jiang Feiyun really left the arena, the surrounding people finally reacted. Jiang Feiyun really forfeited and was not joking. Chapter 16:26. In Jiang Feiyun's eyes, his opponent was a complete lunatic. Moreover, his opponent's emotions were very unstable. If he really fought with him, he was afraid that he would suffer a little. Jiang Feiyun weighed the pros and cons, so he chose to forfeit. Xiaoyang wins. Jiang Zhongqing immediately announced, after being stunned for a while. Soon after, the crowd left somewhat reluctantly. Some people even shook their heads and sighed. They originally thought that they would be able to witness the peak battle between Xiaoyang and Jiang Feiyun today. They never imagined that it would end like this. It was truly unexpected. Of course, this was very normal. After all, they had already obtained the right to enter the divine tomb. Why would they fight until they were covered in injuries and delay the important matters in the end? Since ancient times, there had always been a lesson learned. Even if one was a heaven's prideling of a generation, after a series of bitter battles and because of his heavy injuries, he would not make the slightest progress after entering the tomb of the god of sin. It was also because of this that in the third round of the grand competition of the god world, some people would naturally choose to forfeit when they knew that they were no match for Jiang Feiyun or that they would have to pay a huge price. Xin Ruo glanced meaningfully at Xiaoyang, then turned around and left. His expression was arrogant and disdainful. It was also filled with provocation. Naturally, Xiaoyang also clearly felt this meaning, but he did not flare up. After all, he had to keep a low profile in the god world. Moreover, their battle would begin tomorrow. Even if he wanted to teach him a lesson, there was no need to be in such a hurry. Soon after, Xiaoyang also returned to the small pavilion. When he saw Ziying's miserable state, his eyebrows involuntarily wiggled. Bai Jian sensed that Xiaoyang's emotions had not stabilized, so he shook his head helplessly. At the same time, the king did not return to report after the competition ended. Instead, he directly came over and picked up Ziying. At this moment, everyone present felt an extremely powerful pressure. It was the king's furious aura. He had watched his own daughter being beaten into such a miserable state. As a father, how could he remain calm and collected? I think you know very well why Ziying was beaten like this, King De said in a very gloomy manner. Now, the king's anger was almost completely displayed on his face. If it weren't for the rules, he would have taken action himself. But he couldn't. Therefore, the intention that he wanted to express in his words was naturally very clear. Xiaoyang nodded slightly and said, "Senior, don't worry. Xiaoyang knows what to do tomorrow." Hearing this, the king's expression eased a little and he nodded. At this moment, Bai Jian subconsciously sucked in a breath of cold air. Although the battle tomorrow had yet to begin, the conflict between the two sides had already accumulated to the point of near collapse. In that case, the battle tomorrow would probably be quite tragic. I hope that Wu Shuang didn't become your friend for nothing. After King De finished speaking, he rushed away with Ziying in his arms. At this moment, Xiaoyang also had a slight headache. He really couldn't understand why Shinamo was so hostile towards him. Moreover, he was so ruthless towards his own brother from the same sect. For a moment, Xiaoyang was also baffled. However, since Shan Emo dared to attack his friend and even had a hint of provocation in it, Xiaoyang naturally didn't have to be merciful. At this moment, Bai Jian patted Xiaoyang's shoulder and said, "Since Shan Emo was able to become the first on the Hidden Dragon ranking, his strength is definitely not simple. Be careful in tomorrow's battle." In the past 10 years, Shan Emo had repeatedly attacked, and it could be said that he had crushed his opponents. His true strength was naturally not to be underestimated. Moreover, cultivators in the god realm were originally stronger than cultivators in other places. Although many geniuses had their own pride in their hearts, the god realm was a place blessed by nature. This was something that had to be acknowledged. After exchanging a few words with Bai Jian and the others, Xiaoyang returned to the King Manor alone to concentrate on his cultivation. However, under such circumstances, he couldn't calm himself down at all. In fact, he was still a little impatient. Although Ziying usually looked a little arrogant and even a little barbaric, she was still a little girl after all. Her temperament wasn't bad. However, today she was beaten up by Shinamo. Who could stand it? Even some onlookers felt that Shinamo was a little too much. After a long time, Xiaoyang's door was pushed open. When he looked up, he saw Yang Sun limping in with an extremely weak aura. Yang Sun looked at his friend, whose thoughts were in a mess, and a helpless smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. However, when Xiaoyang sensed that Yang Sun's aura was very weak, he couldn't help but frown subconsciously. It could be said that Yang Sun's injury had something to do with him. Do you blame yourself? Yang Sun smiled bitterly and sat down with his legs crossed. Xiao Yang didn't deny it and nodded slightly. If it wasn't for his appearance, how could Yang Sun and Ziying be ostracized by their clansmen? How could they be so ruthless during the grand competition? Yang Sun's expression didn't change as he continued. You don't have to blame yourself. Before my big brother left the God realm, he was already #1 on the hidden dragon roll. Therefore, Shinemo has always been suppressed and has been dissatisfied with us for a long time. Hearing this, a trace of doubt flashed across Xiao Yang's face. Simply put, Shinemo is a very arrogant person and has always been unwilling to fall behind others. However, he has been suppressed since the beginning, so he is very unhappy. He has always wanted to defeat my big brother. Unfortunately, my big brother went into closed-door cultivation and you became the scapegoat. Yang Sun smiled bitterly. Although they were all relatives of the royal family, the internal strife between them was very terrifying. After all, there were only so many resources. Who wouldn't want to fight for more for themselves? All in all, Shinemo is so arrogant that he is twisted. You don't have to blame yourself. Do what you have to do tomorrow. Don't think too much. Yang Sun sighed. With this explanation, Xiao Yang finally understood what was going on. Shen Emo had been suppressed by Shen Wushuang for decades, so he held a grudge. Therefore, he wanted to take this opportunity to vent. As for Xiao Yang's appearance, it was just an excuse for him to attack openly. Chapter 16:27. In the arena of the Black Tortoise Field. The two youths stood facing each other as the surrounding spectators took their seats. There were no empty seats, as almost everyone in the fairy's capital was present. News of yesterday's incident had already spread. Jiang Feiyun had forfeited when he faced Xiao Yang. Such a method could be said to have created a great influence for Xiao Yang. Coupled with Xiao Yang's terrifying performance in the second round, they realized that this outsider's strength was not as simple as it seemed. If Xiao Yang's strength was really ordinary, how could he have passed the second round of assessment as weak and incompetent as the news spread after the Jade Lake banquet? Even though there was some luck involved in the second round of assessment, the result of defeating Luo Ku was real. Even Jiang Feiyun, who was ranked second on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard, had forfeited. It could be said that this was the first time in thousands of years that an outsider had made it to the finals. In addition to the previous rumors, many people were looking forward to the clash between the #1 genius of the divine realm and the geniuses of the outside world. What kind of sparks would be created? De Wang stood at the top with a gloomy face. It was obvious that he was still brooding over yesterday's incident. Jiang Zhangqing, on the other hand, had a calm and composed look on his face. Even though his son had forfeited yesterday, his heart was in turmoil. However, after he went back and thought about it, it was indeed so. There was no need for him to suffer. On the other hand, when this outsider, Xiao Yang, faced the #1 on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard, what kind of sparks would erupt? That was really something to look forward to. Due to the constant hype, it had attracted many people to watch. Bai Jian did not go back on his words. He had come. Even Yang Sun, who was severely injured, had come. The final battle of the realm of the gods. Begin! Jiang Zhangqing shouted loudly. Instantly, the crowd below the arena went into an uproar. They were all waiting for the battle to begin. Now that the curtains were finally about to be drawn, they were all extremely excited. After Shan Fan stood still, the way he looked at Xiao Yang changed slightly. A disdainful smile appeared on his face, as if he didn't take his opponent seriously at all. As far as God Days was concerned, Xiao Yang was only a person from the outside world, and he was even a genius from a relatively remote place. Even if Xiao Yang possessed some strength, Xiao Yang was only an uncivilized person from mountains. So, what qualifications did Xiao Yang have to compare himself with God Days? Especially recently, people kept comparing him to Xiao Yang, which made him very unhappy. Therefore, he'd made up his mind today to prove to the entire God realm that he was Shen Luo the one and only Shen Luo. Whether it was Xiao Yang or unrivaled God, none of them could steal his limelight. He wanted to defeat them. Although Xiao Yang was furious, he suppressed it because he had heard from Yang Sun that his opponent was very strong and he couldn't let his guard down. Sometimes emotions could indeed cause a person's strength to be unbalanced. What he wanted to do today was to defeat God Days. He didn't care about anything else. You should be very angry right now. Seeing that Xiao Yang's emotions had stabilized, God Days was puzzled and confused. In God Days' opinion, he'd attacked Yang Sun and his sister to provoke Xiao Yang. However, now it seemed that the effect wasn't very ideal. That made him feel a little uncomfortable. Xiao Yang sneered and said, "I'm not just angry right now. Why do you have to do this? You attacked so ruthlessly for an outsider like me." God Days laughed when he heard that. He felt that this person from the mountains was too narrow-minded. However, what God Days wanted to do was naturally not that simple. "You'll never understand what I'm doing. With your brain, you naturally can't think of it," God Days said disdainfully. Due to the isolation of the ring's formation and the fact that God Days could speak very softly, no one could hear what he was saying clearly. However, they didn't make a move for a long time, which made many people lose their patience. Some people with bad tempers even started to shout. Bai Jian, Yang Sun, and the others were also confused. They felt that given Xiao Yang's character, it was impossible for him to do things so slowly. However, they had no way of knowing what he was thinking. Could it be that God Days still has some sort of scheme up his sleeve? Bai Jian muttered. In Bai Jian's opinion, Xiao Yang was a completely furious existence. If anyone wanted to deal with him, then Xiao Yang wouldn't let them have an easy time either. However, he hadn't made any move at all. This made people really puzzled as to what was going on. Yang Sun shook his head naturally and said, "I'm not very sure about that." However, Yang Sun frowned slightly because he sensed that this matter wasn't as simple as he'd imagined. With Xiao Yang's talent, would God Days try to rope in Xiao Yang now that he had completely revealed it? Moreover, his previous actions were only for the sake of a factional dispute. Things weren't as complicated as they'd imagined. However, this thought couldn't be verified immediately because Yang Sun wasn't sure if that was the case. However, on second thought, Xiao Yang wasn't a two-faced person, so he calmed down a little. "I know you're very strong, even stronger than most people in the divine realm. However, in my eyes, you're nothing more than a mountain person from a remote place. What qualifications do you have to be mentioned in the same breath as me?" God Days took a deep breath and rebuked angrily. Hearing these words, the corners of Xiao Yang's mouth curled up slightly. He knew very well that God Days had a twisted sense of pride, which was why he looked down on him. "Since you can defeat Luo Ku, it means that your strength can indeed shake me. However, I won't give you the chance." God Days shouted sternly. After saying that, God Days' aura began to rise rapidly, and his strength increased crazily. For a moment, the atmosphere in the arena immediately became tense. It could be said that swords were drawn, and even the air was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Just a small spark was enough to completely detonate it. Xiao Yang's expression became much more serious at this moment. Although he was very angry now, he wouldn't look down on any opponent because of this. A bolt of lightning flashed, and the silver lightning spear appeared in his hand directly. Chapter 16:28. The silver lightning spear in Xiao Yang's hand constantly flickered with electric radiance. The streaks of electric radiance were like small snakes swimming around the body of the spear. Coupled with the binding of the silent thunder bead, the power of the lightning became more restrained under such circumstances. However, its destructive power did not weaken because of this. Instead, it became even stronger. Somewhere on the high platform, when a man with a strong appearance saw the spear, his eyes also became a little fiery, and even a little bit of hatred was added to them. At this moment, a woman walked to his side and said softly, after entering the divine tomb or leaving the divine realm, You will naturally be able to take back everything that belongs to you." Hearing this, the man's expression eased up a lot, and he nodded heavily. At this moment, golden light flowed out of Shinma's body. The golden light seemed to have substance. Every ray of golden light was like a sharp arrow that was difficult to match. The golden light shuttled back and forth on Shinma's body at an extremely fast speed, as though it was weaving an armor. The originally tyrannical aura also began to be restrained at this moment. At their level, when a bit of power began to be restrained, it meant that they were beginning to accumulate power. The accumulation of power was for the next, even more terrifying and powerful eruption. Jiang Zhangqing couldn't help but gasp when he saw the scene. He didn't expect Shinma to take out his trump card right from the start. It seemed like he really regarded Xiaoyang as his #1 enemy. It could be said that Shinma had never used this move in the Divine Realm Grand Tournament. He hadn't even used it during the crisis of the second round of assessment. De Wang frowned slightly when he saw this. Originally, he thought that Xiaoyang still had a chance. However, Shinma's move could be said to not give his opponent any chance at all. He wanted to unleash his full strength and crush his opponent directly. At this moment, many people felt a layer of worry in their hearts. Under such circumstances, it was almost impossible for Xiaoyang to find an opening to win. Many people's emotions completely exploded at this moment because they hadn't seen Shinma use this move in a long time. However, this also meant that Shinma was very serious and had a strong desire to win. How strong was Xiaoyang exactly? He actually made Shinma use his trump card to deal with him directly? It could be said that many people were a little surprised by this point. It was like playing a game of mahjong and drawing a hand of Tian, who right from the start. Golden battle body art. Shinma shouted angrily. Immediately, the wisps of golden light converged and entered every part of his body. I can't remember how many years it has been since I last used the golden battle body art. Xiaoyang, you have such an honor. I'll use my full strength and let you know how huge the gap between us is, Shinma said loudly. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently when he saw Shinma's slightly deranged appearance and said, "Your golden battle body art has indeed brought you great benefits. Unfortunately, it hasn't reached its peak." Of course, Xiaoyang wasn't making this up. There were still some golden lights flickering within Shinma's body as if he couldn't suppress them. This was the flaw of Shinma. He couldn't fuse perfectly, so there were still some flaws. So what if I haven't reached my peak? It's enough to deal with you. After Shen Mo finished speaking, he let out a low roar and charged toward Xiaoyang. He looked like a golden meteor that was falling rapidly. Shinma's aura had undergone a huge change. He seemed unparalleled. He was like an unstoppable mountain of gold. At this moment, a huge pressure filled every corner of the arena. If it weren't for the strength of the array, the arena would have collapsed under the force of Shinma's kick. Golden lights flashed continuously. Every time they flashed, they were like sharp swords that cut through the sky. Xiaoyang was fearless when he saw Shinma charging towards him. He shouted and stabbed out with the spear in his hand. Shinma had the support of the golden battle body art, but Xiaoyang's silver lightning spear was a saint-grade magic treasure. Why would he be afraid of Shinma? Xingwu raised his fist high and punched down fearlessly. At this moment, his entire fist had turned golden. It could be said that the golden battle body art's mystery was that it could make a person's body tough and tyrannical. It could even be comparable to magic treasures. Boom! When the fist landed on the silver lightning spear, the two forces exploded violently. Instantly, a shockwave swept out, forcing Xiaoyang to dodge the attack and quickly retreat. On the other hand, Shinma seemed to be relying on the profundity of his body technique to stand there without moving at all. In the next moment, he leaped up again and pressed toward Xiaoyang. Although he wasn't very fast, the pressure was so great that it made people feel like they couldn't match him. The last time Shinma used the golden battle body art, it was only comparable to a mid-grade heaven-grade magic treasure. Now, With this strength, his entire body can be considered a saint-grade magic treasure. Jiang Zhangqing's expression changed slightly as he spoke with some surprise. This was also the terrifying part of this technique. It could turn a person into a magic treasure, and even more so in terms of strength and explosive force. Furthermore, he could be considered to have become one with the Dharma, and he could do as he pleased. Although such a terrifying state was a shortcut, it was still extraordinary. Jiang Zhangqing finally understood why his son had given up so decisively. Now it seemed like it was a very rational thing to do. Dawang nodded slightly and said, "After all, how could someone who could take first place on the Hidden Dragon rankings be an idiot? I just didn't expect him to hide it so well." Dawang was now slightly worried. Although Xiaoyang was powerful, Shima was also very hardworking in his unique environment. With such strength, could he be a match for Xiaoyang? If they were in the God realm and enjoyed the same resources, then Xiaoyang would definitely be able to do it. However, their foundation was unfair to begin with. So what if they were in the same realm? It could be said that among the younger generation of the God realm, Shima was equivalent to King Wu at the peak of the 8th level. It could even be said that among the 3rd, 6th, and 9th levels, such an extreme combat power had almost surpassed the 9th level. Therefore, this was the terrifying part of Shinma. Although he was still at the 8th level of King Wu, his strength had already surpassed the realm that people saw. Chapter 16:29. With the support of the Golden Battle Body Art, Shinduo can be said to be a pseudo-rank 9 existence. The king thought for a moment and sighed. Jiang Zhangqing nodded in agreement. The Golden Battle Body Art's tyrannical aspect was that it could increase one's strength by a lot. The more one improved, the more one would improve. But it's still a pseudo-rank 9 in the end. It's not the true rank 9 of King Wu. Therefore, it's still unknown who will emerge victorious. Jiang Zhangqing also smiled in anticipation. While Jiang Zhangqing and the king were talking, Shinduo and Xiaoyang had already exchanged blows several times, and the battle was very intense. And because of the mysteries of the Golden Battle Body, Shinduo naturally had the upper hand and was suppressing Xiaoyang in every aspect. However, although Xiaoyang was suppressed in every aspect, he did a very good job of letting go. He would even occasionally counterattack, barely managing to be on par with Shinduo. However, it was hard to say what would happen in the end. After all, in such an intense battle, it was possible that a moment of carelessness could lead to defeat. In a situation where the strength was close, sometimes a small mistake would be enough for the opponent to magnify it infinitely. Although such situations were often seen in the hands of sly old foxes, these two young people were top existences, and their understanding of power was also extraordinary. Moreover, it could be seen from the attack and defense that they were displaying that they had reached the pinnacle in both martial skills and martial arts. Facing Shinduo's crazy attacks, Xiaoyang also felt immense pressure. It had to be said that Shinduo had indeed improved greatly under the support of the secret technique. Even though Shinduo's speed had become a little clumsy because of this, his strength had indeed been greatly enhanced, and even his defense had become much stronger. Even though the Silver Lightning Spear was a saint-grade magic treasure and was very powerful, sometimes the aftershock would only leave a small scratch on Shinduo's body, and it would completely heal in the blink of an eye. Due to Shinduo's confidence, he became more and more proficient in the fight. The power of this punch was even stronger than the previous one. It was extremely fierce. It was as if he only had one goal now, and that was to beat Xiaoyang to death. "Aren't you very strong? How come you can't even fight back now?" Puzzled, roared angrily. Because he was born in the God realm, God Days had a very high sense of superiority. In his opinion, how could Xiaoyang, a peasant from the mountains, be compared with him? Even now, he was still unwilling to admit that there was someone outside of the God realm who could surpass him. Of course, he had never been defeated by anyone from the outside world. Even though Xiaoyang had a very high chance of defeating him, Xinxia didn't believe it. He felt that this was also impossible. Perhaps it was because of this sense of crisis that made Shenluo so crazy. The corners of Xiao Yang's mouth curled up slightly. He snorted coldly and shook the long spear in his hand. Immediately, a tyrannical aura erupted. Bolts of lightning exploded crazily. It could be said that lightning flashed and fire flashed. The air was filled with a manic element, all of which was caused by the continuous explosions of the lightning power. Because of the continuous explosions of the lightning energy, waves of small impact force appeared continuously. It seemed meaningless, but it could cause Shindua's perception to deviate a little. If he was lucky and Shinduo didn't care about it, he might be able to taste some benefits. However, the probability of this happening wasn't high. Why are you still trying to be brave? You're no match for me. Shinduo roared angrily and directly punched the empty space in Xiao Yang's chest. Xiao Yang didn't have time to defend himself at all. After being hit by this punch, he was directly sent flying. Immediately, Xiao Yang also felt that his chest had suffered a heavy blow. It was very uncomfortable and painful. His body was like a kite with a broken string. He couldn't control himself at all. With this punch, many people were astonished. Shinduo was indeed worthy of being the #1 existence on the God Realm's hidden dragon list. He was able to grasp such a small opening. It was truly terrifying. Do you think your defense is impenetrable? Even if my speed is a little slower, it's definitely not something you can block. Shinduo roared angrily. After saying that, Shinduo wouldn't let go of this opportunity. He turned into a ray of golden light and charged directly at Xiao Yang. Since this opportunity had been created, Shinduo naturally wouldn't let it go. With such a great opportunity, wouldn't it be perfect if he could defeat Yi Shiwen in one fell swoop? Therefore, he wouldn't give Xiao Yang the slightest chance to catch his breath. As long as he could beat his opponent to death and obtain a smooth victory, it would be a good thing. Moreover, if he could end the battle quickly, it would make others feel that Shinduo was unparalleled. As for Xiao Yang, he was just a loser, a stepping stone. Xiao Yang naturally sensed that his opponent was madly charging towards him. Furthermore, he was prepared to end the battle as soon as possible. He was slightly surprised in his heart. However, when he thought of how he treated Ziying before, this was naturally not surprising. One had to admit that Shindua's strength and experience were indeed very rich. It was just a split second of opportunity, but he had grasped it. Heavenly Qin Mountain. With a thought, Xiao Yang roared angrily. Immediately, the Heavenly Qin Mountain appeared and charged directly at Shinduo. Seeing the appearance of a saint-level magic treasure, the corners of Shindua's mouth curled up slightly. So what if his opponent was using a saint-level magic treasure? It was the same for his body as well. Therefore, Shinduo didn't have the slightest fear. He didn't even pause for a moment and directly charged over. Many people couldn't help but subconsciously hold their breaths when they saw this scene. They were very much looking forward to whether Xiao Yang would reverse the current situation in this collision, or whether Shinduo would be unparalleled and directly charge through the Heavenly Qin Mountain, continue forward, and obtain victory in this battle. Xiao Yang was extremely shocked when he saw that Shinduo didn't retreat at all. Instead, his battle intent became even denser. With a thought, the Heavenly Qin Mountain rapidly shrank. As long as the Heavenly Qin Mountain could stop Shindua's advance, Xiao Yang would be able to stabilize himself. It wouldn't be too late for him to counterattack then. At the same time, Xiao Yang was extremely confident. The Heavenly Qin Mountain couldn't suppress Shinduo, but it could still stop him for a while. Boom! Chapter 1630. Even though Shinluo was powerful and his entire body was comparable to a saint-tier treasure, he was unable to display the expected power when he faced a true saint-tier treasure, directly creating a hole in the mountain. Instead, he was sent flying backwards like a cannonball. After the Tianqin Mountain was struck by this huge force, it began to shake violently. It looked like it was on the verge of collapse. At this moment, Xiao Yang stood up again. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his expression was very ugly. He had to admit that Shenluo was indeed a very troublesome opponent. He was an opponent worth dealing with all his strength. It could be said that Xiaoyang hadn't met an evenly matched opponent in the same realm for a very long time. This Shenluo was the first one. Soon after, Xiaoyang waved his hand and stabilized Tianqi Mountain, which seemed to be on the verge of collapse. At this moment, Shima also stabilized himself. He was panting heavily. He didn't expect the rebound force of the sky's Zither Mountain to be so terrifying. It was truly unimaginable. The two of them had misjudged each other and underestimated each other's strength. That was why they were in such a deadlock. However, many people were amazed. Originally, they thought that Xiaoyang would be beaten to a pulp by Shenluo. They didn't expect that Shenluo's move would reverse the situation and stabilize everything. Moreover, Xiaoyang's injuries didn't seem to be very serious. He could still continue fighting. The king sighed helplessly in his heart. Xiaoyang's ability was indeed very strong, and his talent was also very outstanding. It was a pity that he wasn't born in the god realm, but in a small place that even he had never heard of. Timing, location, and people were all very important to cultivators. Clearly, Xiaoyang was weaker than Shenluo in these three aspects. Therefore, no matter how hard he worked, there was still a gap. It could even be said that it was difficult to surpass. Jiang Zhangqing also heaved a sigh of relief. He originally thought that the exciting battle would be a one-sided crushing, but it seemed that it wasn't the case. This young man, what kind of experience did he have to be able to deal with the proud sons of heaven of the divine realm's imperial family? Jiang Zhangqing was very interested in this point. Why exactly did unrivaled God value this outsider so much? I didn't expect Shenluo to be so powerful. Bai Jian was also moved. He had no choice but to admit that he was absolutely no match for Shenluo at the 8th level of Kingwu. Of course, if they were both at the 9th level, then it would be a different story. Li Chunyi's expression also changed slightly. He recalled that his senior brother had said before that as long as they fought with their lives on the line, almost no one could defeat Xiaoyang. But now, it seemed that this was not the case. At this moment, even Yang Sen's expression became a little gloomy. He was very familiar with the gilded battle body art, which was one of the more advanced techniques of the Imperials. Furthermore, being able to cultivate to such a level was already an extremely terrifying existence. Many people had thought that Xiaoyang would not be able to win in the previous battle. This was because the difference in strength between them was just too great. Of course, they also believed that Xiaoyang would be able to surprise them. However, this surprise would not be able to cause too much of a stir and allow him to become the champion this time. Senior brother, don't tell me that Xiaoyang doesn't have any chance at all? Li Chunyi asked worriedly. No one in the pavilion spoke. In fact, the three of them knew very well that under such circumstances, the outcome was already decided. It's hard to say. Xiaoyang hasn't even used his trump card yet. It's just that we don't know if he'll have the chance. Bai Jian sighed helplessly as he spoke. Xiaoyang also had a big killer move, but whether it could shake Shenluo was another matter. In the arena, although both of them had stopped fighting and adjusted the energy in their bodies without making any movements, their auras were still competing. The traces of battle intent in the air did not lessen because they stopped fighting. Instead, it became even more intense. Your control is indeed very strong, but you can only use external forces. This is the fundamental reason why you can't defeat me. Shenluo clenched his fists and said coldly. Shenluo was not unprepared for this battle. He had naturally gone to find out more about Xiaoyang. From his investigation, he also learned that Xiaoyang had relied on the power of the Silver Lightning Spear to defeat those who did not deliberately cultivate their bodies in the 10 Directions 8 Wasteland map. However, Shenluo had the gilded battle body, so it was different. It could be said that he perfectly restrained Xiaoyang's specialty. Even if your spear technique has been cultivated to the extreme, as long as I can prevent you from displaying your advantage, it will be equivalent to losing its effect. Xiaoyang sneered and said, I originally didn't want you to lose too badly, but since you're still so arrogant, I don't mind letting you see my strength. After saying that, Xiaoyang did not make any movements. His aura even weakened a lot. This action made Shenluo a little puzzled. What's going on? Or is there something wrong with his brain? All along, Xiaoyang had only shown his cultivation in terms of spiritual power. As for the King Wu rank 8 in his body, he had always hidden it. But now, if he did not use more trump cards, it would really be difficult for him to defeat Shenluo. Therefore, he had no way to retreat. It was not impossible for him to show another part of his strength now. Not to mention that his resolve was extremely obvious. He wanted to defeat Shenluo and return all the harm Shenluo had caused him by transferring his enmity to someone else. The weakening of his aura was not because his spiritual power was weak, but because he had begun to restrain it. All of a sudden, Shenluo felt a little strange. He even felt that the air was filled with a strange aura. Xiaoyang was still the same Xiaoyang in front of him. He did not move at all, but the feeling he gave off was very different. What tricks are you playing? Shenluo rebuked angrily. This feeling made him a little flustered. There was an inexplicable emotion that he could not explain. Xiaoyang shrugged indifferently and said, I don't need to play any tricks to deal with you. Chapter 1631. These contemptuous words were said very casually, as if he was casually throwing away a piece of trash. It was so casual and casual. However, such disdain and indifference made Shen Mo's expression change drastically. He had always been the center of attention, yet he wasn't even worth mentioning in front of Xiaoyang. At the thought of this, the anger in Shen Mo's heart burned even more vigorously. How could he tolerate this? Soon he also thought of another possibility, which was that his opponent was attacking him mentally. If he really became flustered because of this, he would fall into his opponent's trap. You're just trying to win a battle of words. Don't worry. Today, I'll make you repent for the rest of your life. You won't be able to stand up again and will forever be a piece of trash. Shenma said furiously. One had to admit that Shenma, who was arrogant to the point of being twisted, was really a little perverted. Even though they did not have too many conflicts, but because of some groundless thoughts, they were able to push all the blame onto Xiaoyang. This kind of ability really made people a little flabbergasted. However, Xiaoyang didn't get angry because of this. He still looked calm and composed as he had completely entered his own state. He was ready to show his full strength now. So Xiaoyang didn't think that he would lose. Therefore, he was very confident and didn't need to worry. However, this confidence made Shenluo feel very uncomfortable. Logically speaking, Xiaoyang should be in a lot of pain after being punched by Lin Fan. However, what was going on with Xiaoyang's current appearance? This made Shenma have a lot of doubts in his heart. However, he didn't waver because of this. In his opinion, Xiaoyang was just putting on an act now. Therefore, he absolutely couldn't fall into Yi Shiwen's trap, lest something unexpected happened when the time came. You'll know in a moment whether it's a battle of words or not, Xiaoyang said calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiaoyang stomped his foot, causing the entire arena to shake. The moment he made his move, he executed the 7 steps of the barbaric steps. Since they were going to fight, Xiaoyang naturally wouldn't hold anything back. Furthermore, he would do his best. Previously, it was precisely because he had lost the opportunity to make the first move that he had been suppressed. He had even exposed a flaw and was bombarded by a punch from his opponent. Therefore, it was time for him to make the first move and make the other party suffer. After this step, the powerful shockwave quickly reached Shenma, causing him to frown slightly. Compared to before, such a thick and solid power was indeed somewhat different. In an instant, Shenluo understood the reason behind this. Xiaoyang had probably never used his full strength before, which was why he had behaved like that. Even if Xiaoyang were to display his full strength now, so what? Shenluo was only slightly looking forward to it, but he also believed that he would be the only one who would emerge victorious. As for how big of a storm Xiaoyang could stir up, he could still wait and see. When the second step landed, Xiaoyang directly appeared in front of Shenluo, and the spear in his hand directly pierced towards Shenluo's face. This time, the lightning on the tip of the spear was like a demon, constantly waving its claws and fangs. As long as it could get close, it would immediately explode. Xiaoyang's attack was very steady, without the slightest tremor, as if everything was set in stone. Such a sharp attack caused many people to exclaim in surprise. This was the situation that this battle should have presented. There was back and forth. If it was just a one-sided crushing victory, it would really be a little unsatisfying. At the very least, they would feel very disappointed. Faced with this incomparably sharp spear, Shenluo immediately moved, wanting to dodge it. However, the body of the spear suddenly descended at this moment. It was like a bolt of lightning, and there was no way to avoid it. At this moment, Shenluo also came to a sudden realization. When he shifted his body, he had already fallen into Xiaoyang's trap, and there was no way for him to dodge at all. It could be said that he had to take this attack. Thinking of this, Shenluo's expression became very grave, but he didn't want to dodge anymore. Instead, he directly punched towards Xiaoyang's chest again. Since he couldn't avoid it, he might as well accept it calmly. Then he would make a desperate counterattack and let his opponent know that no matter how smart and scheming he was, in the face of absolute strength, all of these were just illusions. They were completely useless. Moreover, he was now using the gilded battle body, and his body was like a saint-grade magic treasure. Even if they collided, so what? Xiaoyang suddenly let out a cold laugh, as if he already knew Shenluo's movements very well. However, he didn't stop his movements, and his left hand directly blasted over. Boom! The spear smashed into Shenluo's shoulder first, and the power of lightning also crazily exploded at this moment, constantly attacking him. At the same time, Shenluo's fist also arrived, and Xiaoyang's left hand hesitantly met it directly. Immediately, the two enormous forces collided together. A huge rebounding force caused the bodies of the two to tremble. Immediately, both of them swiftly took a few steps back. However, this time, Xiaoyang only retreated 2 or 3 steps more than Shenluo. Of course, this was also because Xiaoyang was using his left hand. Even though his left and right were constantly trembling, Xiaoyang held the silver lightning spear upside down in his right hand, supporting himself without the slightest ripple. On the other hand, Shen Meng was extremely shocked when he sensed the powerful collision, because all of this was very different from what he'd expected. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the physical strength he desired would be so powerful. This kind of collision made many people raise their eyebrows. They had never imagined that the seemingly thin and weak outsider would have such a tyrannical, explosive power. To be able to exchange blows with Shen Mo in a fair and square manner without suffering much of a loss. Just how exquisite was his strength! Moreover, anyone with a discerning eye could see that Xiaoyang had gained some advantage in this exchange. Even though the gilded battle body was tyrannical, there was still a trace of a burn mark on Shenluo's shoulder. Chapter 1632. Shenma frowned as he looked at the burn marks on his shoulder. He did not expect his opponent to be so powerful. Furthermore, Shenma could sense that Xiaoyang's physical strength was not weak either. What was the reason for this? Could it be that he was able to take care of both sides in such a barren place? As a result, Shenma had to admit that he had underestimated Xiaoyang too much. Even so, his innate sense of superiority still gave him great confidence. It was as if the young man in front of him was just a ripple on the surface of a calm lake, unable to stir up any big waves at all. In the next moment, Shenma patted his shoulder gently. Strands of golden light flickered continuously, and the burn marks healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was the terrifying aspect of the gilded battle body. As long as one did not die from serious injuries, they could recover in a short period of time. The corner of Xiao Yang's mouth twitched as he looked at his opponent. He had to admit that this guy's gilded battle body was indeed very difficult to deal with. No matter how strong his opponent was, Xiao Yang was not afraid at all. In his opinion, it was just a little more difficult to deal with. On the contrary, the more evenly matched the opponent was, the more excited Xiao Yang would be. I've really underestimated you. However, if that's all you've got, I'm afraid it's not enough to shake me. Shinma looked at Xiao Yang with a much more fervent gaze. At the same time, his fists shone with strands of golden light. A tyrannical aura rose once again at this moment. It was as if the powerful aura was unparalleled. Instantly, Xiao Yang furrowed his brows. He did not expect that his opponent had actually held back and did not display his full strength. Now, Shinma's strength could be said to have increased by another level. That huge pressure continued to wreak havoc on the arena. The auras of the two people were also competing with each other. Even though they did not make a move, the pressure between their auras continued to crush each other, and the sound of explosions continued to ring out. Xiao Yang shrugged. It's still too early for you to say that. After saying that, Xiao Yang executed the 7 steps of the barbarian god once again and charged toward Shenluo. It was true that Shenwu's physical body had become terrifyingly tough after using the golden battle body art. However, Xiao Yang did not hold back either. Even though he did not have any unique techniques, he could rely on the toughness of his physical body to face Shenwu head-on. Good timing! Seeing this, Shenluo roared angrily and raised his fists. His power was like ripples that rapidly gathered on his fists. Boom! As the punch landed, golden light shone brightly and the space shook. Punch after punch landed on the body of the spear. Although Shendua's speed wasn't fast, the power of each punch was extremely terrifying. Right now, he was like a raging god. The power of each of his punches was enough to pulverize a mountain into smithereens. The silver lightning spear in Xiao Yang's hand danced continuously as he withstood the crazy attacks of his opponent. Even though Xiao Yang had an exquisite movement technique, like the 7 steps of the barbarian god, and even though he was very fast and could avoid many punches, it was still somewhat strenuous for him to face such a crazy attack. It even gave people a feeling that he was running out of strength. For a moment, the wind from the punches blew and the shadows of the spear flashed. The spectators held their breaths and calmed their hearts. They had to admit that this kind of punching was very satisfying. Even though Xiao Yang was controlling the spear, his fists would still pierce through it. It could be said that as long as there was a slight chance, they would launch a fierce attack on each other. For a moment, both Shinma and Xiao Yang were hit by each other's punches. However, their bodies didn't move at all. It was as if the other party's punches were soft like cotton and didn't have the slightest bit of power. However, that sort of impact was something that everyone could feel. It was extremely terrifying. It could be said that if a cultivator with a lower cultivation level were to take such a punch, their ribs would probably shatter and they might even lose their ability to fight. After thinking about this, everyone couldn't help but gasp in their hearts. Not to mention those with a lower cultivation level. Even if they were at the same cultivation level, they would probably be beaten to death with such a brutal fighting style. Many old fellows in the divine realm were also shocked. They knew very well that Xiao Yang came from a small place that they had never heard of. However, his strength was able to go head-to-head with Shenduo. This was really a little terrifying. If it weren't for the fact that everything was happening right before their eyes, they probably wouldn't have believed that this was real even if they were beaten to death. As the saying went, hearsay was false. However, they now saw it with their own eyes. Their fists were constantly hitting each other, and wave after wave of powerful air waves swept out continuously. Even though the arena was made of special materials and was supported by an array, there were already many footprints on it. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the strength of the two was. This battle can be considered King Wu's most enjoyable battle among the 8 ranks. Jiang Zhongqing stroked his beard and chuckled. It had been a long time since Jiang Zhongqing had seen such a satisfying battle where every punch hit the flesh. In such an intense battle, they went back and forth without any fear. This was the vigor that belonged to young people. If every step was calculated too carefully, then there wouldn't be any accidents. On the contrary, such a hearty close combat made people feel very carefree. The king also nodded slightly. This kind of battle style could be said to be very rare. However, when it came to the two of them, it wasn't so simple. It could be said that the explosion of power between a punch and a spear was not inferior to that of some low-level martial arts techniques. It could even be said that although some martial arts techniques were low-level, they didn't seem to have much effect as one's cultivation level increased. However, it would be imperceptibly integrated into one's usual attacks. It's still understandable that Shinduo has the gilded battle body art. However, Xiaoyang didn't seem to use any techniques, but his body was actually able to go head-to-head with Shinduo. Could his body be that of a demonic beast's? Jiang Zhongqing suddenly thought of something and asked doubtfully. The king smiled and waved his hand. He was born in the human race. He's not from the demon race or the demon race. Chapter 1633. Hearing this, Jiang Zhongqing's eyebrows twitched slightly. This was a little illogical. As far as he knew, Xiaoyang hadn't cultivated for a very long time. It was already difficult for him to climb all the way to the 8th rank martial king realm. Could it be that he still had the time to temper his body and cultivate to this level? If he didn't have hundreds of years, how could he have done it? Of course, there were some things that everyone was well aware of. Some people were blessed with natural endowments and could indeed take many shortcuts. For example, there were some cultivation techniques that others didn't need to think about and could immediately start cultivating. However, some people with lower endowments needed to comprehend for a long time before they could cultivate step by step. Could it be that Xiaoyang's constitution is very special? Jiang Zhongqing asked doubtfully. The king shook his head helplessly because he couldn't tell what was special about Xiaoyang in his interactions with him. At least, he couldn't sense it at all. The battle became more and more intense. Perhaps it was because of the punches that hit the flesh. The two people's bloodthirst completely erupted. Their eyes looked like they were about to turn red. Muffled groans continued to ring out. Even though their physiques were very strong, who could completely withstand the force of this attack? It wasn't that they didn't know pain, but they had been enduring it all this time. The more Shenwu fought, the more shocked he became. He originally thought that he could rely on this advantage to directly crush Xiaoyang and obtain victory if he used the gilded battle body art at the beginning. However, who would have thought that this person wasn't easy to deal with either? His physique was also very strong. Moreover, he didn't use any techniques and relied solely on his body to forcefully endure everything. The strength of his physique made people even more flabbergasted. It was hard to believe. Bai Jian was completely stunned as he watched. Xiaoyang had already taken dozens of punches from Shen Luo, but he did not show any signs of defeat. Instead, he became more and more courageous as the fight progressed. This was truly shocking. All of a sudden, Bai Jian thought of the heavily injured youth who had resolutely challenged someone of a higher level and even killed his opponent. Presumably, the strength of his physique was Xiaoyang's true trump card. All this time he hadn't shown it. It was also because of this tough physique that he had the capital to turn the tables. Li Chuanyi and Yang Sen looked at each other and laughed helplessly. The current Xiaoyang was completely a monster in their eyes. It could be said that if the two of them fought like this, they would probably be beaten to death. The gap between them was like a chasm that was difficult to cross. Another collision occurred, and the two of them were forced back by the huge force of the collision. Their chests heaved up and down as they gasped for breath. The veins on their bodies were protruding, making them extremely conspicuous. Shen Luo wiped the sweat off his forehead, and a smile appeared on his face. It had been a long time since he had experienced such a hearty battle. He didn't expect to meet his match today. Their strength was even on par with each other, and it was difficult to determine the victor. He felt a lot more carefree. At the same time, the sense of superiority caused Xinwu's expression to change again. Only by defeating such a powerful Xiaoyang could his name spread far and wide in the god realm. The first place on the hidden dragon roll was not enough for Xinwu. I didn't expect your physique to be so strong. As Xinwu said this, a line of blood gushed out from the corner of his mouth. Although there weren't any injuries on the surface from the previous collision, his internal organs had suffered quite a bit of impact and were heavily injured. This was unavoidable. Xinwu's gilded battle body art hadn't been cultivated to the peak, so it still had its flaws. His body was as tough as gold, and his resistance to attacks was very high. However, his internal organs weren't the same. You're not bad, either. As Xiaoyang said this, a line of blood also gushed out from the corner of his mouth. In the collision just now, Xiaoyang also suffered a lot of punches. Fortunately, his physique was especially strong, so he was able to withstand them. Originally, Xiaoyang wanted to defeat Xinwu with his physique to defeat his opponent's confidence. However, it seemed that it was still a little difficult. The gilded battle body art was very powerful, and it was difficult to defeat him head-on. Since you and I are on par in this aspect, let's see who's stronger. Xinwu's expression turned serious as he said this. Xiaoyang didn't dare to let his guard down. He also shook the silver lightning spear in his hand. The meaning behind Xinwu's words was very obvious. Since they couldn't determine the victor in this kind of physical fight, they could only start from other places. Instantly, the situation became tense again. Originally, there was a momentary pause, but now they had resumed their tit-for-tat. If it weren't for the fact that they met at the wrong time and were in the wrong camp, Xinwu would be very happy to be Xiaoyang's friend. It could be said that the foundation of many things was built on strength. Obviously, Xiaoyang had the ability to do so, but now they were unsurprisingly standing on opposite sides. Are these two monsters going to continue fighting without resting? The corners of Li Chunyi's mouth twitched a little as he said, he really couldn't understand. They had already fought to this extent. Didn't they consume a lot of energy? Didn't they need to rest for a while? Bai Jian shook his head and said, this battle can be said to be King Wu's peak battle among rank 8s. Whether it's physique or spiritual energy, they can be said to be the strongest among rank 8s. Therefore, this battle won't end so easily. Hearing this, Yang Sun nodded in deep agreement. It could be said that the two of them were top-notch existences, whether it was in terms of physical strength or in terms of skill control. Their strength was not to be underestimated. Up until now, although they had all displayed their valiant side, they had not been able to see anything that would determine the outcome of the battle. It's really hard to imagine how tyrannical the physique of these two monsters is now. Li Chunyi was a little puzzled. As a sword cultivator, Li Chunyi found it very difficult to understand because they paid more attention to swordsmanship and focused on offense as defense. Therefore, they didn't deliberately cultivate their physique at all. Chapter 1634. Bai Jian smiled wryly as well, because the Sky Sword Realm cultivators were all about showing off their abilities and using offense as defense. As for their physique, they had only relied on spiritual energy to nourish it at the beginning of their cultivation. Although it was far beyond ordinary people, the gap between them and those who focused on cultivating their physique was huge. The saying unconventional referred to the Sky Sword Realm cultivators. Somewhere in the spectator stands, the valiant man looked at the arena with a hint of disdain in his eyes, but his expression was very complicated. The woman standing beside the man also had a hint of doubt on her face, as if she couldn't understand what was going on. In the arena, the smell of gunpowder in the atmosphere was particularly strong. These two youths wanted to humiliate each other because the other had touched on their respective taboos. However, they were also affirming each other's strength. Shen Emo growled, and the golden light on his fist shone even more brightly. It was dazzling. "I'll let you have a taste of my heaven-opening noble energy fist." After Shin Mo finished speaking, the golden light on his fist shone brightly as if it was real. Every ray of golden light looked like a sword aura that was constantly moving around. Wave after wave of heroic spirit rose and fell at the same time, as if there was an imposing manner that wouldn't change even if the world collapsed in front of them. Streams of fist wind whistled endlessly. Even though the fist didn't land on the arena, it was still possible to see that it would leave a small ravine after brushing past the arena. If this was outside, it was naturally not enough to reach the apex. Even people with some cultivation could do it. However, it wasn't that simple to leave a mark on the arena. It could even be said that many people were proud to be able to leave a mark on the arena. Every ray of fist intent felt like an ancient ferocious beast that was constantly roaring. It was as if this part of the world would be directly torn apart under such a huge pressure. Even though Xiaoyang hadn't made a move yet, he could still feel the sharp aura from it. Even though he didn't move, there was a slight pain on his skin. At this moment, Xiaoyang also started to move. The silver lightning spear in his hand also started to dance rapidly. Streaks of lightning continuously surged out and weaved in front of him. Layers upon layers of lightning weaved into a net, intertwining with one another. It was like an inescapable net that was difficult to break through. As the lightning net continued to condense, it did not take long for it to look like a pool of lightning. Its violent aura was unmistakable. At this moment, Shima let out a low roar and threw a punch at Xiaoyang. As he charged forward, countless fists appeared behind him. It looked like the water of the sea was flowing backwards. It was a horrifying sight. Countless golden lights constantly flickered. It was very dazzling. Some people who were slightly weaker couldn't even see what was going on inside. Every ray of fist intent contained within could be said to be very terrifying. It seemed like it would be easy for them to destroy a mountain or even a county. "Go!" Xiaoyang growled. Immediately, Tianqin Mountain appeared as the first line of defense. Facing the pressure of a saint-level magic treasure, Shinma was still full of pride. He didn't show the slightest bit of fear. He wasn't even moved by it. "Good timing!" Shinma roared and threw a punch, directly hitting Tianqin Mountain. Suddenly, a loud sound was heard. Tianqin Mountain was also constantly trembling and retreating. The stones on the mountain were also constantly falling. Even if it was a saint-level magic treasure, a huge mountain, Shinma could still blast it back with one punch. However, Shinma's attack wasn't over yet. He continued to charge forward, as if the suppression of the saint-level magic treasure earlier was only a small interlude. It was not enough to reach the apex at all. Even his aura didn't decrease because of the pause just now. It even gave people a feeling that he was getting braver and braver as he fought. This was Shinma. He looked and did things very gloomily, and his performance in battle was vicious. However, this was all because he hadn't been able to enjoy himself to the fullest before. At that moment, he felt extremely satisfied when he fought against Xiaoyang. Thus, when he attacked, he was filled with lofty sentiments. This was the true side of Shinma. It was just that he had always hidden it, so no one knew about it. A sliver of shock appeared in many people's eyes when they saw how valiant Shinma was. The person who ranked first on the hidden dragon rankings had always crushed his opponents to victory. Even if there were some difficult battles, he would defeat his opponents in a fierce manner. However, it was really very rare to see such an evenly matched battle. It could be said that everyone present felt that this was a feast for their eyes. They were able to witness a battle between two top geniuses. It could even be said that every detail between them was worth thinking about carefully. Details were everywhere. With a low shout, the small lightning pool surged again and pressed down on Shima. Bolts of lightning crisscrossed like a fishing net, trying to catch a big fish. Seeing the net of lightning coming at him, the young man emitting golden light still didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, he looked like he was going to plunge headfirst into it. His valiance was even more shocking. Many people subconsciously held their breaths because they knew that this move of Shinma's had a huge advantage. However, there were no absolutes in the world. Xiaoyang had always been able to use martial skills that weren't very powerful together to achieve extraordinary results. Therefore, this was bound to be a visual feast for their eyes. It was an intense battle between strength and wit. Therefore, they were very curious about what would happen next. When the lightning pool was about to press down on Shinma, countless golden rays of light appeared on his body. They were like sharp swords or spears, constantly attacking the lightning pool fiercely. Under the golden light, the chains made of lightning quickly broke apart. Although the lightning bolts were broken, they were as cunning as fishes. They surged towards Shen Luo's body without regard for their own lives. Wave after wave, they were extraordinarily fierce. Chapter 1635. Bolts of lightning continued to strike the golden body. Amidst the loud explosions, there was a soft, sizzling sound that made one's scalp tingle. Shinma didn't show the slightest sign of fear or retreat. It was as if there were two words written on his face: "Go forward courageously." As the saying went, once, twice, 3 times will exhaust you. However, Shinma didn't show any signs of that. Instead, his attacks didn't weaken. Instead, they became stronger. Break! The golden youth roared and threw another punch. Immediately, an incomparably tyrannical fist, intent, rushed out of his body. Suddenly, this incomparably huge fist, intent, seemed to have reached an unparalleled level. Immediately, the lightning pool cracked under its might. This showed how powerful and ferocious it was. Many people were dumbfounded. This move had completely stunned them. This kind of terrifying force wasn't something that a level 8 King Wu cultivator could produce. Could it be that he's already at level 9 of King Wu? For a moment, this doubt appeared in many people's hearts. They even felt that it wasn't impossible. Thinking of this, many people sucked in a breath of cold air. Even some of the older people felt a little ashamed. They had been stuck at level 8 of King Wu for thousands of years. Now, none of them had the confidence to be comparable to the 2 youths on the field. Whether it was a hearty battle or a junior's control of their own abilities, it seemed that they couldn't be compared to the 2 youths. Xiao Yang's expression didn't change in the slightest when he saw the lightning pool shattering continuously. Instead, he was very calm. It was as if all of this was within his expectations. There was nothing strange about it at all. Xiao Yang naturally knew that it was impossible to block the opponent's attack like this. Shinma's desire for victory was very strong. From the beginning, his attitude was very clear. He would go all out. Every attack couldn't be a test. He wanted to defeat his opponent. The lightning pool soon collapsed, but all the power didn't scatter. Instead, it quickly rushed toward Shinma. Shinluo knew that he had no way of dodging the power of the lightning, so he simply ignored it and allowed the power to strike his body. "What else do you have?" Shinma roared. He swept away all the obstacles with 2 punches. Now, all the power he had left behind was poured into this 3rd punch. What he wanted was to land a solid punch on Xiao Yang's body, to make him kneel down under the power of this punch to the point where he would never be able to stand up again. 1,000 poisonous hands. At this moment, Xiao Yang was also facing a huge pressure. However, he had no way out, so he could only go forward bravely. Moreover, even though Shinluo's strength was extremely terrifying, he was no longer able to match up to his previous strength after the exhaustion from before. Therefore, there were some flaws in this punch. This was the opportunity that Xiao Yang worked hard to create for himself. At the same time, Xiao Yang also threw out a punch. Instantly, all the poison in his body burst out crazily at this moment. The green poison power had already been condensed. With this punch, it was like a dragon coming out of the sea. It impatiently accumulated power and formed a ferocious dragon coming out of the sea. In an instant, Countless amounts of poison power condensed together and blasted out. Boom! Immediately, the two forces collided and exploded at the same time. In an instant, both of them were forced to take a step back. The floor under their feet cracked, which was very eye-catching. After taking a step back, they quickly stabilized their bodies and began to compete in strength. They all wanted to establish their own advantage with this move. Only in this way would they be able to easily end the battle. Otherwise, if they didn't overdo it, it would probably be a stalemate again. After the battle just now, both of them were very clear in their hearts that it was almost impossible for them to end the battle quickly in a situation where their strength was almost the same. Therefore, they felt very helpless and depressed in their hearts. Everyone was shocked when they saw Xiao Yang and Shen Luo facing off against each other. Could it be that these two fellows have an endless supply of energy? Now that they were using it so generously, it was as if the previous fierce battle didn't exist at all. All of a sudden, the two of them were unable to control this power and were instantly sent flying. Xiao Yang staggered back a dozen steps before he managed to stabilize himself. Fortunately, he had used the silver lightning spear to stabilize himself. That was why he did not fall to the ground. Shinma didn't have it easy either. Even though he had the protection of the golden battle body art, he still suffered quite a bit of injury. The aura in his body was chaotic, as if it would completely go berserk in the next moment. Seeing that his opponent didn't fall, Shinma forced himself to hold on. Even though his arms and legs were trembling, he didn't dare to fall and let others think that he was at a disadvantage in this battle. For a moment, Shinma's brows furrowed even more. He knew that he wouldn't be able to hold on much longer if this continued. Moreover, he had been using the golden battle body art for too long, so his body was almost overloaded. However, it was simply impossible to end the battle in such a stalemate in a short time. In this regard, Shinma made up his mind and kept thinking of countermeasures. On the other hand, Xiao Yang quickly stabilized his emotions. He shook the spear in his hand, and the power of lightning began to rapidly gather. It was as if he didn't need a chance to catch his breath. Perhaps this was a great opportunity for Xiao Yang. If he didn't defeat Shinma now, when would he? Many people were shocked when they saw that this seemingly ordinary young man didn't try to suppress his previous injuries and instead wanted to continue fighting. Could it be that he was made of iron? Even if he was, it would be difficult for him to continue fighting under such intense battle. However, he wanted to continue. Interesting. Since you want to play, I'll play with you. Shinma shouted angrily. After that, Shinma waved his sleeve and forcefully gathered his strength as well. He was prepared to fight Xiao Yang once more. Even though he was exhausted now, he definitely wouldn't take half a step back. Then, a spear roared like a flying dragon. Chapter 1636. Xiao Yang directly tossed the silver lightning spear in his hand. Immediately, thunder rumbled and bolts of lightning drew out an extremely beautiful arc in the air. However, no one felt that the arc was beautiful at this moment. Because the spear was a Saint-tier magic treasure, its might naturally couldn't be underestimated. If it was an ordinary expert like King Wu, he might have been killed on the spot. Even though Shinma had the support of the gilded battle body, it wasn't necessarily easy for him to forcefully resist the might of the spear in his current state. After all, no matter how tough his body was, it couldn't really resist the impact of the spear tip. Shinma didn't show any fear or retreat at all. His eyes even blazed with the flames of battle. His sense of superiority didn't allow him to be inferior to others, so he had to fight with all his might. Only in this way could he prove his strength. He was the pride of the heavens, and his status was unshakable. The punch could be said to have condensed all the strength in Shinma's body. He felt that Xiao Yang probably didn't have much strength left. Thus, as long as he could block this attack, he would be able to obtain victory. However, the development of the situation was somewhat different from what God Days had expected. This was because Xiao Yang exerted force with his feet and directly rushed towards him like an arrow. Shinma sneered inwardly when he saw this. Since you're in such a hurry to decide the victor, then I'll naturally accept this outcome. With the support of the supreme technique passed down in his clan, Shima didn't think that Xiao Yang's strength was still greater than his. On the contrary, his eagerness to attack made others feel that he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. He had to decide the victor in this short period of time. Otherwise, he would not be able to continue and could only resign himself to death. When he thought of this, Shinma's expression became slightly more savage. Victory was right before his eyes. All he had to do was persevere. Even though the broken ribs in his chest were painful, he had to endure it. Sometimes it was just a dispute of a single breath. But he couldn't afford to lose. Everyone was moved when they saw how resolute the two youths were in making their moves at this moment. They even seemed to be willing to pay any price. Some people even began to calculate in their hearts. Where did Xiao Yang come from? How many people like him were there in his hometown? If they could be properly nurtured, then their forces would be able to reap a lot of benefits. However, for those who had such plans in their hearts, even if they did, they would only be disappointed. Just like how the flowing cloud realm only had one Xiao Yang, the heaven sword realm only had one Bai Jian. In the divine world, there was only one Princess Mingzhu. Compared to Xin Luo and Jiang Feiyun, they were far inferior. Boom! With a loud bang, Shinma smashed the spear to the ground. At the same time, he raised his fist and punched toward Xiao Yang's chest. As long as he punched, everything would be over. He would also prove to the divine world that his position was still unshakable. After entering the divine tomb, if he could obtain some opportunities, he could even surpass that person and become the #1 genius in the divine world. Thinking of this, Shinma became more and more excited. With this punch, he punched out with all his strength. One punch to determine victory. Traceless dream. A strange light flashed in Xiao Yang's eyes. Immediately, Shinma became absent-minded. However, with just this one punch, Shinma was already defeated. Slap. With this sound, the world seemed to have become quiet. The sound of this slap was especially loud, like thunder from the 9 heavens, rumbling. In the next moment, Shinma was directly sent flying. Even though he had already punched out and forced Xiao Yang to take half a step back, he still forced himself to use the last step of the 7 steps of the barbarian god to catch up with Shinma. When Shinma, who was flying backwards, saw Xiao Yang suddenly approaching him, his heart turned cold. A trace of bad memory suddenly appeared in his mind. These 2 memories were of him bullying Yang Sun and Yang Sun. Such a scene quickly reappeared. Xiao Yang immediately attacked with his left and right hands, his fists frantically greeting his body. The situation that was similar to 2 days ago suddenly reappeared. Many people were very surprised in their hearts. Wasn't this method a bit too much? No matter what, Shinma was a relative of the divine world's imperial family. His talent and status were even more extraordinary. Being bullied by an outsider like this wasn't a slap to the divine world's face. After seeing this scene, Jiang Zhangqing frowned slightly because he didn't know whether he should stop it or not. After all, no one was allowed to interfere in the martial arts competition in the divine world. If one interfered, it would be breaking the rules, and the divine world valued rules. However, if he didn't stop it, the divine world's face might be slapped because of this. De Wang stood there with a cold expression as if none of this had anything to do with him. In fact, when Xiao Yang slapped him, he had already won. However, he didn't want to end the battle. He wanted to return all the humiliation his friend had suffered. For a moment, no one spoke. Everyone fell into silence. Although Xiao Yang's current actions were indeed a little too much, because of the rules, no one could say or do anything. Shinma wanted to humiliate Xiao Yang. But no matter what, he didn't expect that he would plant such a seed of disaster for himself. However, Shinma didn't regret it in his heart. In fact, he was even more resentful now. This country bumpkin actually dared to treat him like this. He deserved to die. However, no matter what Shinma was thinking, his strength was being ruthlessly scattered by his opponent. He couldn't resist at all and could only be bullied. Yang Sin's eyes flashed with joy as he watched. This was because he knew very well that Xiaoyang had indeed vented his anger this time. However, he would definitely offend Shima's family. At that time, his path in the divine world would naturally be difficult. Although the Dawang residence wasn't bad, sometimes, when the strength of the two sides were about the same, it was really difficult to deal with due to personal feelings. Unless the two sides completely broke off, only then could they act without any scruples. Even if a storm was brewing in the dark, it couldn't be done openly. Boom! Xiaoyang stomped Shinma into the arena. His eyes were still very cold as he said, "Those who humiliate others will be humiliated by others." Chapter 1637. Many people couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when they heard those words. Now, many people understood the side of this outsider, which was that he would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. If you humiliated him, he would naturally return the favor. What was even more true was that he did have such strength, and it was not just boasting. Shinluo's mind was in a daze from the beating. Even his sea of consciousness was shaken, but he could still hear those words clearly. Of course, it was Xiaoyang who wanted him to hear them. Right now, Shinluo had been beaten up very miserably. Of course, it was mostly because of his face. It was hard for anyone to accept being slapped in the face. Moreover, Shinma's abnormal sense of superiority made it even harder for him to accept this fact. Everything seemed to have been settled, but Xiaoyang suddenly turned around and looked at the audience. This was because Xiaoyang felt an extremely strong hatred. He felt as if there was a blade on his back. Soon, he saw a middle-aged man glaring at him with gritted teeth. It was as if flames were about to shoot out from his eyes and burn him alive. The corners of Xiaoyang's mouth curled up slightly. Although he didn't know who that person was, it was obvious that it had something to do with Shinma. How could the old man be indifferent when the young one was beaten? The champion of the realm of the gods tournament, Xiaoyang! Jiang Zhongqing immediately announced when he saw the situation. He also gave Xiaoyang a look, indicating for him to move his foot away. After all, he had achieved his goal and could restrain himself. If he really offended all those people, he would definitely be ostracized in the realm of the gods. At that time, it would be difficult for him to do anything just by relying on the protection of the dimension. Xiaoyang smiled and immediately moved his foot away, taking a few steps back. At this moment, the middle-aged man who'd been watching Xiaoyang rushed up the stage and carried dazed up. Although that person didn't say a word and didn't make a move, Xiaoyang could feel a huge hostility, as if he wanted nothing more than to skin him alive. Xiaoyang, it's one thing for you to win, but it's your fault for humiliating others like this. The middle-aged man suppressed his anger and shouted. This shout was also very powerful, and everyone in the field was immediately awakened. Only now did they realize that the winner of this great competition of the God realm was actually an outsider. It could be said that since the beginning of the divine world's great competition, the champion had never fallen into the hands of an outsider. However, something like this had happened today. Xiaoyang is indeed in the wrong. When Wu Shuang comes out of seclusion, I will ask him to discipline his younger brother properly. I think it would be fine, the king said coldly. When the middle-aged man heard this, he raised his head and saw the king's lukewarm expression. Instantly, his heart was overflowing with anger. However, he knew in his heart that Dazed's previous actions were indeed a little too much. Let's wait and see. After the middle-aged man finished speaking, he turned around and left with Dazed in his arms. No matter how angry the middle-aged man was, he could only suppress it in the black tortoise field. If he made a mistake, it would be useless. On the contrary, it would give others a reason to criticize him. There was no meaning in doing so. At this moment, everyone seemed to have lost interest. They didn't intend to continue watching the competition and left the field one after another. If someone from the God realm won, they would definitely be cheering. However, the person who won was someone from the outside world. How could they be happy about this? Jiang Zhangqing looked at everyone leaving and smiled bitterly. Speaking of which, this great competition of the divine world's great competition was the worst one ever. However, he had to admit that the quality of this competition wasn't inferior to the previous ones. It could be said that there were many dark horses in this competition. However, they were too indulgent. Therefore, it was a pity that they didn't get to see some of the battles. For example, Sky Sword Realm's Li Chuanyi had displayed his brilliance previously. However, when he faced Ziying, he gave up. Moreover, Jiang Feiyun gave up. It was indeed a pity that he didn't get to see these two battles. On the contrary, Jiang Feiyun, who was sitting at the side, smiled bitterly. He didn't expect this outsider to be so strong. It was indeed a pity that he didn't get to fight with him. He was afraid that it would be difficult for him to have a chance to fight with him in the future. After a short while, most of the people in the Black Tortoise Field had left. Jiang Feiyun and the King also came to the arena. Looking at the young man who couldn't stand steadily, a faint smile appeared on their faces, especially the King, who looked as if he had gotten his revenge. There was an indescribable sense of relief and joy. As expected, the younger generation will surpass us in time. Although you've just entered King Wu's 8th level, looking at your performance just now, you're already invincible in the same level. Ordinary 9th level experts might even be able to wrestle with you. Jiang Zhangqing sighed. There was no problem with this. Among the 3,000 small worlds, the God Realm was the strongest. Shen Hao was ranked first on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard. Therefore, he was naturally considered the strongest existence in the 8th level. Xiaoyang had defeated him. Naturally, he had proven himself. Xiaoyang only smiled shyly and didn't answer. Of course, the reason was very simple. In the battle just now, he had suffered injuries that were unclear. Now he was suppressing his own aura. If he opened his mouth and leaked his aura, the suppression just now would be for naught. Seeing that the young man didn't answer and had a strange expression, Jiang Zhangqing understood and didn't take it to heart. Xiaoyang, it's not suitable for you to enter the palace in your current condition. So, we'll bring you to get the bestowment after you've recovered. What do you think? Jiang Zhangqing asked softly. The first prize this time was a mid-grade saint-level treasure. How precious was it? How could he take it out so easily? A saint-level treasure was already precious, let alone a saint-level treasure. Even though the God Realm was vast and had many treasures, there weren't many saint-level medium-level treasures. Xiaoyang nodded slightly to show that he understood. Looking at the stubborn young man, Jiang Zhangqing smiled and said, "The King, I'll go report to the God Emperor first. You can make arrangements for the matters here." Prime Minister Jiang, there's no need to worry. Let things be as they are, the King said. When Jiang Zhangqing heard these words, he let out an inexplicable laugh and strode away. Chapter 1638. The great competition of the realm of the gods ended with an outsider's victory. For a time, the divine capital was in turmoil. Even the entire realm of the gods was shaken. Some of the old men outside of Divine World were even more astonished when they heard the news. This could be said to be unprecedented. Moreover, the winner was not a cultivator from a few top worlds. Instead, he came from an unknown small world that they had never heard of before. In this short period of time, many people began to speculate in their hearts. After all, the outsider was able to suppress all the heroes and win in one fell swoop. That was his strength. However, some of the rumors made them understand that there were some personal grudges mixed in. As the saying goes, words are passed on. As the rumors spread, the meaning naturally changed. The whole story became a mess. Every version could be said to be endless, leaving people flabbergasted. For a time, many people were also in an uproar. They felt that the outsider's method was too arrogant. Not only did he win, but he even dared to humiliate their number one genius on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard. Wasn't this method a little too despicable? Xiaoyang's reputation had spread throughout the Divine World because of his victory in the Divine World Grand Competition. It could be said that there was no one who did not know about him. However, his reputation was mixed. Some people admired Xiaoyang. They felt that he was very powerful to be able to cultivate to such a level in a small place and win in one fell swoop. However, some people felt that Xiaoyang was too ostentatious. Although he won the battle, his character was very worrisome. It could be said that there were different opinions on this matter. At the beginning of this matter, they were also in full swing. It could be said that they were condemning him in speech and writing. It was especially fierce. However, there was not the slightest bit of news in Divine World. It was as if the imperial family did not care about this matter at all. As time passed, naturally no one cared about this matter anymore. At the very beginning, all the major forces in Divine World were also waiting for news from the imperial palace to spread. They wanted to see how Xiaoyang would end up. But in the end, even after a few days, there was still no news. In the past few days, Xiaoyang had been recuperating in Unrivaled God's courtyard after returning from the Black Tortoise Arena. In the battle with Dazed, Xiaoyang had won by a small margin, so his injuries were not light. Originally, Xiaoyang thought that he could easily obtain victory. However, he had to admit that he had underestimated the strength of the top geniuses in the God Realm. It could even be said that he had only met Shenluo in the God Realm when he was evenly matched among those of the same cultivation level. This pulled Xiaoyang's inflated ego back to reality. The battle with Shenluo made him realize that the cultivators of the Celestial Realm were indeed much stronger than the cultivators of other places. Therefore, he had to be extra careful when facing some old fellows of the Celestial Realm in the future. Who knew when there would be a major change? If he really lost because of his carelessness or even to the point of no return, he would really be a laughingstock. In the past few days, Yang Sen and Zi Ying would occasionally visit Xiaoyang. They would chat with him and give him some elixirs to help him recover quickly. At the same time, Xiaoyang also learned some news from Yang Sen about the feud between the De Palace and the Zhao Palace. Shenluo was from the Zhao Palace, and the man who took him away that day was Shenluo's father, the eldest of the 3 great kings in the God Realm. King Zhao, De Palace, and Zhao Palace had been competing since they were young. Whether it was their cultivation realms or their achievements, they were always locked in a fierce competition. Although they were brothers, neither of them was willing to give in for the sake of their pride. They had always been at loggerheads with each other. Therefore, the feud between them naturally deepened due to the friction. Later on, after the 2 of them had formed their own families, and with the God Emperor's mediation, the relationship between the 2 of them had temporarily eased up. However, they would still have some disputes in secret, but they couldn't be brought to the surface and weren't as fierce as before. Later on, they both had children. Who would have thought that some sparks would fly between Shenluo and Shen Wushuang? Although the 2 of them did not have any obvious conflicts on the surface, Unrivaled God did not pay much attention to them as they were both highly talented individuals. On the other hand, Dazed God had a strong desire to win. He wanted to compete with Unrivaled God in every aspect. Shen Wushuang was by no means a good-tempered person. Therefore, he would sometimes return the favor without holding back. Therefore, the feud between them deepened even further. After hearing this news, Xiaoyang's entire body felt somewhat unwell. It turned out that this feud was an old grievance. King Zhao felt that he had not won against a palace, so he wanted his son to complete the task. He did not expect that he would lose, so it was normal for him to be dissatisfied. A few days passed, and Xiaoyang was having a good time. Sometimes he would hear some strange news in the God Realm, and there was no lack of jokes that made him happy. Although the God Realm had strict rules, it was also because of these rules that some disturbances were stirred up. With the passage of time, Xiaoyang's body was already as strong as a demonic beast, so he recovered very quickly. After 7 days, he was almost completely healed. As for the injuries on his internal organs, there was no need to worry about them. He could only slowly recuperate. As for the prize, Xiaoyang did not care about it. Xiaoyang was very clear about this. The champion Kaitu was obviously a gift from the elders of the god realm to the younger generation. It was just a formality. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, appeared out of nowhere and even won the prize. This was what caught them off guard. A mid-grade sage level Dharma treasure was priceless. Even in the god realm, there were not many of them. How could they give it to an outsider so generously? Therefore, even if he did not get the Dharma treasure, Xiao Yang did not think it was a big deal. He was very open-minded. As long as he could enter the tomb of the god of sin, that was enough. During these few days, Xiao Yang was still most worried about Shen Wushuang. This was because there was not much time left for the tomb of the god of sin to open. Would he be able to break through the shackles and obtain the right to enter the tomb of the god of sin in the remaining time? Xiao Yang, come with me to the palace. Chapter 1639. Hearing that, Xiao Yang raised his eyebrows slightly. He naturally recognized the voice. It was Yang Sun. In the realm of the gods, Xiao Yang did not have many friends. It could be said that he relied on Yang Sun to take care of him all these years. The main reason was that there were too many rules in the realm of the gods. In addition, because he had to prepare for the grand competition, he did not have the time to go out and make friends. He was not very clear about which places he could set foot in and which places he could not. Hence, he did not dare to act rashly and could only stay at home to cultivate. In a short while, Yang Sun appeared in front of Xiao Yang with a faint smile on his face. It was as if he had heard great news. He was extremely excited. He was even happier than getting first place in the examination. You are someone who can dominate a region when you go out. Why are you so anxious now? You are no different from a young boy, Xiao Yang joked with a smile. In the end, Yang Sun pulled Xiao Yang away and said, "Let's talk on the way." For a moment, Xiao Yang was a little confused in his heart. Yang Sun looked like he was burning with anxiety. Could it be that something had happened that made him so anxious? However, from the smile on his face, it could be seen that it was something happy and not something worrying. Although the palace was huge, with their speed they left the palace very quickly and sat on the carriage heading to the palace. After sitting down in the carriage, Yang Sun also sat upright. At the same time, he also began to examine Xiao Yang's appearance. Although he didn't dress up meticulously, he couldn't find any filthy or messy areas. Xiao Yang felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by Yang Sun like that. He said, "Yang Sun, I am not some beautiful girl. Do you have to size me up like that?" As he said that, Xiao Yang felt cold sweat on his back. After all, it was hard not to think too much about that gaze. Yang Sun immediately waved his hand and said, "Stop. I don't have such a hobby. Don't think too much about it." Hearing this, Xiao Yang heaved a sigh of relief, making Yang Sun wish he could kick him down. Yang Sun took a deep breath and said calmly, "I'm not joking with you. I came here in a hurry because my father sent me a letter. He wants me to bring you to the palace to meet the God Emperor." As soon as he said this, Xiao Yang's eyebrows twitched slightly. Now that the God Emperor had suddenly summoned him for an audience, Xiao Yang was a little absent-minded. He still had no idea why the God Emperor had summoned him. Could it be that now was the time to settle the score? For a moment, Xiao Yang began to ponder the reason why the God Emperor had summoned him. "That's why I'm looking at you carefully to see if there's anything wrong with your appearance," Yang Sun said with some annoyance. Hearing this, Xiao Yang smiled faintly. However, he was complaining incessantly in his heart because he had a feeling that what he had done in the 10 Directions 8 Wastelands map might have been discovered. He had invaded someone else's treasure with his consciousness without permission and had even humiliated Shenluo so miserably. If the God Emperor wanted to deal with him, wouldn't he be able to do it with a flip of his hand? The more he thought about it, the more guilty he felt. "Why is the God Emperor looking for me?" Xiao Yang asked with a guilty conscience. Even though he already had some guesses in his heart, Xiao Yang still couldn't be sure. After all, these superiors had always liked to pretend to be profound. It was hard to tell what they were thinking. Yang Sun was slightly taken aback and looked at Xiaoyang as though he was looking at a fool. This gaze made Xiaoyang feel a little baffled. He didn't know what was going on and felt a little uncomfortable. What else could it be? You've become the champion of the grand competition. Naturally, the treasure that you deserve will be rewarded to you, Yang Sun said with annoyance. Hearing this, Xiaoyang felt a little more at ease. If that was the case, it was still understandable. Moreover, you've suppressed all the heroes this time. As an outsider who has become the champion, the God Emperor is naturally curious about you. It's normal for him to want to meet you or recruit you, Yang Sun added after thinking for a while. Of course, in Yang Sun's opinion, the biggest possibility was that the God Emperor wanted to recruit Xiaoyang. After all, Xiaoyang was able to defeat Xinluo, which was enough to show how terrifying his talent and strength were. As an outsider who had never been nurtured by the realm of the gods, he was able to become the champion of the world. No matter who saw such an impressive battle record, they would probably be envious and envious. If that was the case, it was understandable. However, Xiaoyang's heart was still pounding. However, he still trusted Yang Sun. The news that this relative of the emperor had received naturally wouldn't be wrong. Moreover, if it was calculated according to the grand competition, it was reasonable. In the past, would the God Emperor summon the treasures that were bestowed in the grand competition? Xiaoyang suddenly thought of something and asked doubtfully. Suddenly, Yang Sun stroked his chin and said doubtfully, in the past, there really wasn't such a situation. The God Emperor would directly bestow the treasures after winning. You must be the first outsider genius to become the champion. That's why the God Emperor wants to meet you personally. Xiaoyang smiled helplessly at the side. He had heard that the God Emperor had been in seclusion for many years and hadn't shown himself. All along, it had been Prime Minister Zhang Zhangqing and the three princes who took turns to manage the affairs of the realm of the gods. Now that the God Emperor had suddenly come out of seclusion and wanted to meet Xiaoyang, how could he not be suspicious? If it was possible, Xiaoyang wanted to retreat. After all, he really didn't know what kind of person the God Emperor was. However, if he were to escape, the outcome would probably be even more tragic. On the contrary, it would make people suspect that he had done something shameless. Since he was already here, Xiaoyang could only take things as they came. After thinking about it carefully, he felt that this was probably the case. Although there were many rules and regulations in the realm of the gods, they were also very thirsty for talents. This time he had shown off his abilities and displayed everything. How could the God Emperor not be interested? Then, Xiaoyang leaned against the wall and closed his eyes to rest. Seeing Xiaoyang's expression change a few times in a short period of time, Yang Sun laughed helplessly. As for what exactly was going on, he didn't dare to say so easily. After a long while, Yang Sun suddenly said worriedly, "Brother Xiao, pay attention to your actions when you meet the God Emperor. Don't be rash." Chapter 1640. Xiaoyang narrowed his eyes. It was impossible to say that he was not worried at all. However, he was in someone else's territory now. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. He did not dare to act rashly. Moreover, he felt that as long as he did not admit what he did in the 10 Directions, 8 Wastelands map, the other party would not be able to force him to confess. Although there was no lack of geniuses in the realm of the gods, how many of them could there be? Therefore, the probability of being recruited was relatively high. Moreover, he had the protection of the Peerless. Therefore, he did not need to worry too much. Some things could be big or small to begin with. Sometimes it would be a little unsightly to fuss over too many things. The carriage traveled very quickly. In less than an hour, they arrived at the entrance of the palace. In the end, they had no choice but to get off the carriage and walk in slowly due to etiquette. It had to be said that there were too many rules in the realm of the gods. However, before they had enough strength, it seemed that other than following these rules, Second Uncle did not have any other choice. After getting off the carriage, Xiaoyang looked up and saw a young man in silver armor walking over. He did not hold a long spear, which was different from the guards at the gate. "Guard Li, I did not expect you to be the one to welcome us this time," Yang Sun said in surprise when he saw him. The young man in silver armor smiled and cupped his fist at Yang Sun as a form of greeting. "Xiaoyang, please follow me," Guard Li said and waved his hand, indicating that they should follow him. After seeing Xiaoyang nod, Guard Li did not hesitate and immediately led them to the palace. Along the way, Guard Li's footsteps were very fast. Perhaps it was because he was leading the way, but it could be said that they were unimpeded and no one stopped them. "Brother Xiao, it is an honor to meet you today. However, it is a pity that I was out on a mission and could not come back to watch the championship battle. It is really regrettable." After walking for a while, Guard Li began to chat. Yang Sun chuckled and said, "Who asked you not to travel with me? Otherwise, you would not have been eliminated in the second round and would not have been busy with your duties." Hearing this, Imperial bodyguard Li laughed bitterly. Back then, Yang Sun had indeed invited him. However, under those circumstances, no matter who heard that he would be in the same team as Xiaoyang, they would probably be scared out of their wits. After all, at that time, Xiaoyang could be said to be the public enemy of all the young talents in the God world. Coupled with his extremely bad reputation after the Jade Lake banquet, who would dare to take the risk? However, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. The originally weak trash in their eyes was actually the strongest dark horse in this grand competition. In the second round of the examination, he was practically an invincible existence. In the final battle, he even defeated the number 1 on the Hidden Dragon rankings, Shen Luo, and seized the championship, causing his name to spread throughout the world. Speaking of which, Li Shiwei also felt that it was a pity. The three of them chatted casually as if they were taking a leisurely stroll. However, their speed was much faster than a normal person running. Although flying was prohibited in the divine capital, the use of some divine abilities was not prohibited. Otherwise, given the vastness of Shindu, the efficiency of doing things would be greatly reduced if they traveled at a normal speed. Yang Sun and Guard Li obviously knew each other, so they were very familiar with each other when they spoke. At the same time, Guard Li was also intentionally or unintentionally expressing his goodwill toward Xiaoyang, indicating that he wanted to make friends with him. It could also be seen from this person's attitude that if it were not for the fact that Xiaoyang had been recognized, he would not have put in so much effort to curry favor with him. One would not rise early if there were no benefits. This was what it was all about. Although Guard Li had already taken up an important position in the palace, and his future was similarly limitless, he could sense that this outsider had become the first person to seize the championship in the grand competition. Naturally, he was extraordinary. On top of that, Unrivaled God had given up his position to Yi Fuqian previously. Yi Fuqian could tell that Unrivaled God had already paved the way for Yi Fuqian. Yi Fuqian had proven his strength in the God Realm tournament. Even if everything went smoothly for Yi Fuqian in the future, it was highly possible that he would become an important member of the God Realm. All of a sudden, Guard Li suddenly recalled what Shen Wushuang had said when he came back. Xiaoyang was determined to win Princess Mingzhu's heart. Many people thought that it was just a joke and did not take it to heart. Now that he thought about it carefully, it did not seem impossible. After thinking about this, Guard Li did not dare to continue thinking about it. Therefore, no matter how he looked at it, being on good terms with Xiaoyang was a profitable business. However, how much benefit he could gain from it was another matter altogether. However, there were only some clues now. Many things had yet to be confirmed, so there was no need to rush. It could be said that the news of the God Emperor summoning Xiaoyang had already spread throughout Shindu. For a moment, many forces began to analyze this matter. Suddenly, many people felt that this was a trap set up long ago, and it was just for an outsider to marry into the family. At the same time, some people thought that it was a coincidence. However, some things were indeed difficult to explain. Sometimes, even small details would be infinitely magnified in some people's subjective consciousness, and they would get closer to the answer they had in mind. Along the way, Many guards and palace maids would subconsciously look at the person guard Li had brought along. Everyone knew in their hearts that the person guard Li was leading now was Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang, the rising star whose name had spread throughout the entire divine realm, whose name was known by everyone. The fact that this person could fight and defeat Qin Wushuang was enough to show how powerful he was. Powerhouses were often existences that they yearned for. After following guard Li through a few lofts, they arrived at the back garden. At this point, they slowed down a lot. In this place, there were small bridges and flowing water. Orioles flew and butterflies danced in the air. The precious flowers and plants were even more overwhelming. Xiaoyang sighed in his heart. The God realm was indeed the first world of the 3,000 worlds. Many medicinal herbs that were almost extinct in the upper realm could only serve as a foil here. At this moment, an extremely terrifying thought appeared in Xiaoyang's mind. He wanted to steal all the medicinal herbs here. Many of the medicinal herbs here could be used as medicinal catalysts for some poisonous pills or elixirs, and there was only one missing. How could he not be tempted by this? However, was it possible to steal something under the God Emperor's nose? Chapter 1641. The back garden was very big, but after walking for a while, they saw a big tree. The tree was more than 10 feet tall and was covered in leaves. It was like a big umbrella, towering there and looking particularly spectacular. This tree was a famous ancient tree called the sky-shrouding tree. The sky-shrouding tree might not even be able to be described as precious, but rare was still lacking. This was because the branches of this tree could burn for thousands of years without turning into ashes. It was difficult for magic tools below the heaven level to leave the slightest mark on it. King Wu's cultivators below the 7th level could hardly move it. If the trunk was used as a defensive tool, its grade would be at least above the heaven level. It was indestructible. The sky-shrouding tree could be said to be full of treasures. They all had their uses. It was just that they varied in size. Looking at the age of this tree, Xiaoyang felt that he could not move this tree even if he tried. This sky-shrouding tree was considered a precious item even in the 3,000 great worlds. In this small world, it was easy to imagine how rare it was. Even Xiaoyang had only seen it in this place. Under the tree, 2 people were playing chess. They seemed to have entered the most tense moment. Now, everyone was very nervous and focused. Every time they placed a piece, they were extraordinarily cautious. It was obvious that they had reached a critical moment. Every step was extra careful. They were constantly thinking about the result. It was as if they would lose the game if they were the slightest bit careless. "Brother Xiao, we won't continue with you." After Guard Li said that, he smiled and made a gesture of invitation. Xiaoyang nodded slightly and walked forward. Every step he took was very steady, and there was not a trace of fear or excitement on his face. Guard Li immediately turned and walked outside with Yang Sun. After all, there are some things that they could not hear. Moreover, there were many situations where even if they knew, it was meaningless. After getting closer, Xiaoyang also saw the appearance of the 2 people. One of them was De Wang. Now he was in a difficult situation. It was as if he had completely fallen into a desperate situation and could not make a comeback. On the other hand, the other person looked calm and steady. He seemed to be in a leisurely mood, as if he was waiting for his opponent to make his move. He was not in a hurry at all. Although no one said anything, the man's natural majesty and the fact that he did not reveal any aura at all, making him look like an ordinary person, was most likely due to him being reserved. The current ruler of the God realm, the God Emperor. The divine emperor did not wear a dragon robe. Instead, he wore a green robe. He looked like a middle-aged scholar. However, the wisp of heroic spirit between his brows caused people to inevitably feel reverence and admiration from the bottom of their hearts. Right now, Xiaoyang was constantly calculating in his heart. He was unable to determine the Emperor God's current strength from the other party's aura. Little Brother Yen, I asked you to investigate who invaded my 10 directions, 8 wastelands map. Do you have any clues? The God Emperor acted as if he did not see anyone coming and asked with a smile. It was as if he was talking about a very ordinary matter. However, these words made the young man's heart sink. Seeing that the distance was suitable, Xiaoyang did not continue forward. He stopped in his tracks and stood respectfully without saying anything. After all, the other party was in the middle of a chess game. It would be rude to speak and disturb them. Moreover, a true gentleman would not speak while observing a chess game. De Wang Xinqian sighed and shook his head. That person is really cunning. The Prime Minister and I have been paying close attention to the change in direction, but we did not find any suspicious signs. Speaking of which, I am really ashamed. We did not even know that we were tricked by someone. In fact, we did not even manage to find a single trace of him even after we investigated one by one. This made Shen Qian feel very helpless in his heart. I feel that the arrogant person suffered a blow from Royal Brother. I'm afraid that his body and soul have been destroyed. As for why we did not find any clues, I'm afraid that someone snuck in. Speaking of which, I have neglected my duty. Shen Qian said helplessly. This negligence made Shen Qian feel very helpless in his heart. He was presiding over this year's grand competition of the God Realm, and such a huge mistake had occurred. How could he not blame himself? Moreover, this was the God Emperor's personal order. That arrogant person hid very well and could not be found at all. It was really a headache, and they did not know where to start. Therefore, after many guesses, Shen Qian felt that unless that person was completely annihilated and his soul was destroyed, how could he have escaped from under his and Jiang Zhongqing's eyes? After suffering a blow from the God Emperor, with King Wu's level 8 ability, it was impossible for him to survive. Even if he was lucky enough to survive and not be discovered, was that possible? When the God Emperor heard this, he placed down a chess piece and said, "You are just too confident. Why? Do you think that no one can play tricks under the eyes of the 3 of us? Since he has the ability to enter my treasure, he naturally has a way to protect himself." When the God Emperor said this, Shen Qian frowned slightly. The chess piece in his hand was also hesitant, not knowing where to place it. Although it's just a feeling and we have not seen him face to face, we can tell that the opponent's soul is powerful. I'm afraid it can't be measured by King Wu's level 8 ability. After all, although the strength of the soul is very important to ordinary people, there are some monsters who focus on cultivating the soul. Will there be a difference? The God Emperor said with a smile. The God Emperor did not seem to be as arrogant as imagined. He seemed like a chatterbox. However, these words made Xiaoyang slightly surprised. Soon after, a calm smile appeared on his face. Originally, he thought that he could play some tricks and cross the sea without showing off. It would be fine if he did not show off in the assessment. However, with his current reputation, it was difficult to hide. The God Emperor seemed to feel the smile on the young man's face, and he smiled as well. At this moment, Shen Qian placed down a chess piece. However, his brows did not relax at all. Instead, he became even more worried. Do you know that even the imprint I left behind was erased by that person using some sort of method? From this, you can see how profound his cultivation of the spirit is. As the Divine Emperor spoke, he calmly placed down a piece. Shen Qian's expression turned extremely ugly. Perhaps it was because he had completely fallen into a disadvantageous position and there was no way to salvage the situation. Of course, what shocked Shen Qian even more was that that person was actually able to erase the mark left behind by the God Emperor. How terrifying was that person's ability? Chapter 1642. This was something that Shen Qian would never have thought of. It could be said that no matter who it was, they would find it hard to accept this reality. Even though it was just a mark left behind through space, it was still left behind by the Emperor God. How could it be erased by a mere rank 8 King Wu? If this was said by someone else, they would definitely laugh their heads off. However, this was a fact that the Emperor God admitted personally. Who could deny it? As such, it was very difficult to imagine how terrifying a person of the younger generation with such an ability would be. The Emperor God looked at his cousin's shocked expression, and the smile on his face grew wider. Not only was Shin Qian shocked and illogical, but the Emperor God was also shocked when he felt that his mark had disappeared. Moreover, he had spent a lot of effort on this matter. Then, do you know why I want to see the champion this time? The Emperor God said with a smile. At the same time, he turned his head and looked at the young man who had been there for a long time. The Emperor God's face was very gentle, and he was sizing up Xiaoyang with interest. He did not care about the fact that Xiaoyang had tried to invade his magic treasure. Instead, he was very interested. What kind of person was this young man? He actually had such great abilities to be able to erase the mark he had left behind. Xiaoyang's lips curled into a smile. Faced with such attention, he did not seem to be afraid or uncomfortable. Instead, he showed it to the Emperor God openly. In an instant, Shen Qian came back to his senses. However, at this moment, he was even more shocked. Could this be the truth? It could be said that the Emperor God would only specially summon the champion of the realm of gods after they had come out of the tomb of the God of Gods with bountiful rewards. However, this time he directly summoned Xiaoyang and even expressed his interest in him. The truth was naturally revealed to the world now. However, Shen Qian was still in disbelief. This was because the Xiaoyang he saw had fought his way out of the 10 Directions, 8 Wastelands map without any signs of injury. It was also because of this that he had never doubted this young man. However, no one expected the young man to be so powerful. He could actually resist an attack from a divine emperor all by himself, and he could even act like nothing had happened. He obtained the divine fire tablets in an extremely domineering manner, which made many people tremble in fear. They didn't even dare to think about snatching them away. Suddenly, Shin Qian shook his head with a bitter smile. He felt that this was indeed hard to accept. However, Xiaoyang's body revealed too many strange things. It was hard to imagine how deep this youth had hidden himself. Since he was able to fight Luo Ku and defeat Xin Zhuang, it was easy to imagine how strong he was. Xin Luo could be said to be in existence at the peak of the 8th rank of King Wu, but he was still defeated. Without sufficient strength and abnormal talent, how could it be possible? Xiaoyang, I'm also very curious. How did you hide from my eyes back then? The divine emperor asked with a smile. He looked very gentle. All along, the divine emperor had been very curious about this. He had pondered over it for a long time and made countless assumptions, but he couldn't come up with an answer that satisfied him. The more he thought about it, the more curious the divine emperor was about this young man's methods. Therefore, he made an exception to summon him this time. Even if the outside world caused some commotion, many people wouldn't take it to heart. However, the ability that Xiaoyang had displayed was enough to move many people. I used this to hide my aura. Xiaoyang didn't hesitate at all. He raised his palm and a map appeared. The mountain river map. If one was arrogant in front of an almighty, one would have the right to be arrogant if the other party let one be. However, if one angered the other party, the so-called arrogance would become a joke in the end. Furthermore, one would end up in a miserable state in the end. Xiaoyang was naturally clear about this in his heart. Since the divine emperor wasn't angry, there was no need for him to provoke him. After seeing the mountain river map, the divine emperor raised his eyebrows slightly. Then he laughed and said, "It's only a heaven-level middle grade, but you've made perfect use of its effects. Brilliant, really brilliant." This young man's mind was very active. Moreover, it could be said that he was bold because of his skills. The divine emperor admired this very much. He felt that this was indeed a very admirable point. Now, the divine emperor also knew what it meant to have his horizons broadened. Perhaps it was because he had been in a high position for a long time that he didn't care about some small tricks. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to it. In this way, many things could naturally be explained. What a good way to survive, by cutting off one's tail. Trying to hide makes it more conspicuous. You waited for the limelight to pass before using an elixir to forcefully stabilize your consciousness so that others couldn't see through it. I have to say that your consciousness cultivation is really powerful. Even in the entire Kingwu realm, I'm afraid you're in the top 3. The Divine Emperor laughed heartily. He seemed to be very happy. It could be said that in the eyes of the Divine Emperor, he had seen many young talents. There were also many bold and meticulous existences. There was also no lack of people with outstanding intelligence. However, the only one who could do this was Xiaoyang alone. I'm very curious. What was the meaning of your actions back then? I don't think you're an idiot who wants to provoke me. The Divine Emperor was still smiling as he said. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I just wanted to do it back then. Perhaps I was just itching to test my skills and wanted to give it a try." Give it a try? When these words came out, Shen Qian couldn't help but gasp. This young man was really fearless. Was such a thing something that could be easily attempted? If he wasn't careful, he would end up with his soul dispersing. Good. Young man, you're really courageous. I admire you for this, the Divine Emperor said with a smile. Seeing the Divine Emperor's delighted look, Shen Qian also smiled apologetically. Originally, he still had some knots in his heart. Now he had untied them. However, he still felt that there was a flaw in this otherwise perfect situation. There was a slight flaw. Many thanks for the Divine Emperor's praise, Xiaoyang said and cupped his fist slightly. Seeing that the Divine Emperor didn't have any intention of blaming him, Xiaoyang also heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the Divine Emperor wasn't a narrow-minded or pedantic person. Otherwise, there might have been trouble today. Chapter 1643. Looking at this young man who had just started cultivating not long ago, the Divine Emperor slowly stood up. There was an intense and unconcealable admiration in his eyes. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he last saw such an unreasonable genius outside of the God realm. Although it could be said that Xiaoyang had already cultivated for several decades, in the eyes of the celestial realm, it was still somewhat insufficient. After all, they had spent hundreds or thousands of years to achieve what they had today. Less than 100 years was too short. It was like a drop in the ocean. The reason why his talent was unreasonable was because the God realm was at the top of the 3,000 worlds. It had the best resources and was blessed by the heavens. However, this youth had defeated the top talents of the God realm. Therefore, people felt that Xiaoyang's talent was unreasonable. As for what kind of mystery this youth had, the God Emperor didn't care about it. After all, everyone had their own secrets. Even if you asked, the other party wouldn't tell you. As the God Emperor who stood at the top of the world, he had a lot of patience for people like this. Shen Qian's heart was also filled with mixed feelings. This young man had indeed given him too many surprises. Do you know why I summoned you today? The God Emperor took a deep breath and asked. Xiaoyang furrowed his brows. Naturally, he had many answers in his heart. However, Xiaoyang really couldn't figure out why the Celestial Emperor was doing this, and what was the most important thing to him. Therefore, he didn't say anything. After all, if he said the wrong thing, he would only be asking for a rebuff. Moreover, these so-called high-ranking people often pretended to be profound so that others couldn't see through their thoughts. Even if you guessed correctly, as long as the high-ranking person didn't admit it, they could just change their words and you would still be wrong. Ah, good boy. The God Emperor saw that the youth didn't speak for a long time and said with a smile. On the side, Shen Qian was also secretly sweating. Although he and the God Emperor were brothers, there was still a relationship between a lord and a servant between them. Shen Qian had some understanding of this young man's temperament. He would rather break than bend. He was just afraid that this stubborn temper of his would be exposed in front of the God Emperor. If that happened, something big would happen. Xiaoyang, I wonder if you are willing to marry into my God realm. The God Emperor's expression suddenly became much more serious as he asked in a deep voice. The moment he said that, Xiaoyang frowned slightly. He did not expect the Emperor God to ask such a question so directly. It really caught him off guard. Facing such a blatant attempt to recruit him, Xiaoyang's heart was analyzing the pros and cons of it, as well as the consequences of it. As for marrying into the God realm, this was something that had never crossed the young man's mind. Since he had been reborn in the flowing cloud realm, then he was a person of the flowing cloud realm. He had started a new life there, and he had made some achievements. When the time came, he would naturally need to return the favor. After marrying into the God realm, his status would naturally rise as well. At that time, he would be able to obtain an endless stream of resources. It would naturally be much easier than breaking his head to look for opportunities everywhere. If there is any princess in my royal family that you like, feel free to choose. When the time comes, I will personally grant your marriage. The God Emperor saw that the young man did not reply, so he continued, to be granted a marriage by the God Emperor himself. How glorious would that be in the God realm? When Xiaoyang heard that, he shook his head decisively. He had indeed never thought about marrying into the God realm. What he was thinking about now was what would happen if he rejected the God Emperor. Even if it's my daughter, Princess Mingzhu, I can give you 100 years. If you can win her heart, I'll be happy to let you become my son-in-law. When the God Emperor saw that the young man in front of him was unmoved, he withdrew his daughter. Her words caused Xin Qian's expression to change greatly. Princess Mingzhu's appearance was like a fairy, and she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Her ability and talent were unique in the God realm, and even the God Emperor felt that he could not compare to her. In fact, Princess Mingzhu had a very high chance of becoming the first empress of the God realm. Her status was unimaginably high. If Xiaoyang really had this chance, then he would become a core figure in the God realm. He might even become the next God Emperor. Right now, Xin Qian's heart was in turmoil. His elder brother actually gave such a great offer to this young man whom he had only met for the first time. It was really hard to fathom. Although Xiaoyang's previous performance was indeed very good, the path of cultivation was originally a long one. In the realm of the gods, it was not uncommon for people to start high and end low. How could they be sure that Xiaoyang could really shoulder the burden? Regarding this, Xiaoyang only smiled indifferently. It was as if he did not see such a great opportunity. He even felt like laughing. You don't have to be in a hurry to answer. You can tell me your answer after 100 years. There's no harm in that. The God Emperor saw Xiaoyang's mouth move and directly interrupted him with a smile. The God Emperor had some understanding of this young man's temperament. Moreover, with his stubborn temper, he would definitely be hot-headed and directly reject him. Therefore, the God Emperor would not give this young man such a chance. Moreover, sometimes when one's words were too harsh, it was equivalent to leaving no way out. Such a method was simply too unwise. At the side, Xin Qian was speechless. Faced with such an opportunity, other people would have knelt on the ground and thanked him. However, this young man was indifferent. It could even be said that he was unperturbed. Just how strong was this young man's temperament to be able to remain so calm and collected? For a moment, Xin Qian did not know what to say. After all, there were simply too many unforeseen events in this matter. Xiaoyang also helplessly laughed bitterly. At the same time, he became more guarded against this green-robed scholar in front of him. After all, sometimes when other people gave you unreasonable conditions, it meant that they wanted a lot of things. In fact, they even wanted something that was much more than the price that others had to pay. No one was a fool who would give all the good conditions to someone who had nothing to do with them. If not for the fact that Xiaoyang had seen too much of the fickleness and change of human nature in his previous life, his heart would probably be in turmoil. Chapter 1644. Such generous conditions were indeed a little unexpected. In fact, it was hard to reject. Fortunately, the young man was able to maintain his composure, which was why he was unmoved. In his opinion, even if he relied on his own abilities, he could still reach a higher place. This Imperial Heaven Mysterious Earth chessboard is my gift for meeting you and also your reward for being the champion. How about it? The Emperor God said and waved his hand, pointing at the chessboard that he had used earlier. As soon as he said that, Shin Qian frowned. Such a generous gift was simply too frightening. What was so special about this young man that he was able to accept such a generous gift? Xiao Yang looked over. Although he did not sense the aura within it, he knew that the Imperial Heaven Mysterious Earth chessboard was probably not simple. An invitation was equivalent to a pseudo-saint weapon. Something that the Emperor God had given out personally would naturally be even more extraordinary. At the very least, it would be a middle sacred weapon. Thank you for your kindness, Emperor God. However, is this Imperial Heaven Mysterious Earth chessboard a treasure that was originally set for the grand competition? Xiao Yang smiled and asked calmly. Sometimes, if one accepted a gift that was too valuable, the favor would naturally be exceptionally heavy. At that time, whether or not he would be able to repay the debt would be another question. Moreover, Xiao Yang did not want to owe too much. When the Emperor God heard this, he shook his head with a smile and said, "This chessboard is an upper sage level weapon." Instantly, Xiao Yang could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He had just taken out a saint-level upper-level ritual implement. He had to admit that this person was really wealthy. He was so generous with his money. The grand competition set a middle sacred weapon. This is a little against the rules, Xiao Yang said after thinking for a while. Shan Qian wanted to slap this arrogant young man in the face. This was the Emperor God's favor, and he actually said that it was against the rules. Wasn't he talking about the Emperor God? Wasn't this a wet blanket? Moreover, not everyone could obtain such a fortuitous encounter. Moreover, even in the realm of the gods, there were only a handful of upper sacred grade artifacts. You actually aren't willing to accept it. Hearing this, the God Emperor frowned slightly. He was naturally well aware of this, and this was the extent of human relations. However, Xiao Yang didn't have the consciousness to accept this favor. This also explained another problem. He didn't want to have too deep of a connection with the divine realm. Such a person, in other words, could be a piece of rock. It would be very difficult to warm it up and use it in the end. What right do I have to accept such a great gift? Senior, you're betting too much on me. But when the time comes and there's nothing to be gained, wouldn't that be a huge loss? Xiao Yang seemed to have no more scruples and said in a low voice. From the very beginning, Xiao Yang had indeed thought this way. If he was too deeply involved, he was afraid that it would indeed bring some unnecessary trouble to himself. Moreover, there wasn't much friendship between them to begin with. Now that he had accepted this gift, it would probably be difficult for him to repay it when the time came. The God Emperor frowned slightly, and a trace of displeasure could already be seen on his face. Brother, you really have to think thrice about this matter. Although this kid is displeasing, he is indeed thinking for the realm of the gods, Shinqian said. Although the Imperial Heaven Mysterious Earth chessboard wasn't as valuable as the 10 Directions 8 Wastelands map, it was still an upper sacred grade artifact. It was very precious. Now that he was giving it to an outsider, this gift was indeed a little too generous. The God Emperor sighed helplessly and shook his head. He said, "Xiao Yang, is it really so difficult for you to join the realm of the gods?" This time, the Celestial Emperor asked the question that had been bothering him for a long time. Although the God Emperor already knew the answer, he was still unwilling to accept it and wanted to confirm it again. Xiao Yang nodded slightly, expressing his attitude. "Kid, you don't know what's good for you. Are you not afraid that you won't be able to walk out of the palace?" The God Emperor scolded angrily. With this scolding, his green robe immediately fluttered, and an invisible pressure spread out purposefully. It was as if the heavens had collapsed and a meteorite had fallen, directly pressing down on the youth. Instantly, Xiao Yang felt a huge pressure pressing down on his head. He didn't lower his head at all, but the muscles and bones in his body kept creaking. The God Emperor was furious. Shin Qian, who was beside him, also turned pale with fright. He immediately cupped his hands and bowed. Brother, he's just a child who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Why bother with him? Although Shan Qian also felt that Xiaoyang didn't know what was good for him, he was still a good friend of his eldest son. Naturally, he had to stand out and say a few words. After all, things had already developed to this stage, and there was nothing he could do. Shin Qian also had no choice. Xiaoyang was stubborn and didn't know what was good for him. He knew that even if he tried to persuade him, it would be useless. Xiaoyang's bones kept creaking, and the stone floor under his feet cracked like a spider web. It was clear that the force was strong. If I leave my own world for the sake of my own future and come to your God realm, at that time, if there's a place stronger than your God realm, I'm afraid that I won't care about our old friendship. With such a character, would you dare to put me in an important position, God Emperor? Xiaoyang snorted coldly and said without fear. Once these words were spoken, the God Emperor's expression became even uglier. This kid was completely singing a different tune from him. The God Emperor was furious, and the world was shocked. Shin Qian glanced at the chessboard. He also knew that this was a gift for Xiaoyang to join the God realm. However, the youth wasn't willing to abandon his own world, so he didn't dare to accept this chessboard. Since they had already come to this stage, it was hard to say what choice he would make. It was this young man's unyielding character that made Shin Qian admire him a little. Although such a character would cause him to be stubborn and easily broken, it was also a good thing to be friends with such a person, because if he promised something, he would definitely do it. He also didn't have to worry that this friend of his would stab him in the back. If God Emperor thinks that I'm offending you by not joining the God realm, then Xiaoyang has nothing to say. As the youth spoke, he frowned and released the spiritual energy in his energy center. Even if he didn't have the chance, he had to give it a try. However, at this moment, the pressure suddenly disappeared, and the God Emperor laughed out loud. Chapter 1645. The moment the pressure disappeared, the young man secretly heaved a sigh of relief. It was not too different from what he had expected. The Emperor God was merely putting on an act to test his character. If he had accepted the gift, the Emperor God would naturally be happy. However, the Emperor God would probably have some opinions about him in the future. Shin Qian also felt that it was a false alarm. If they had really fallen out, he really would not know what to do when the time came. After all, it was unrivaled God who had recommended Xiaoyang. If anything were to happen here, they would not be able to absolve themselves from the blame. Good. Very good. The Emperor God looked at the young man with great approval. The smile at the corner of his mouth became even wider. If a person could easily forget his roots and join another organization, he would probably become a slave of 3 surnames in the future. When one was in power, they would definitely support one wholeheartedly. If an even more powerful existence appeared, they would definitely follow without any bottom line. However, such a stubborn temper made the Emperor God feel a little uncomfortable. It could be said that the young man before him was the first person who had gone against his will and refused to accept his gift. How far do you think you can go on your own? The benefits that your world can give you are negligible, the Emperor God suddenly said in a low voice. This was indeed the truth. Xiaoyang could not deny it. Among the upper-level cultivators, the person with the highest realm was only King Wu, rank 5. As for higher realms, they had obtained them through endless experience in the outside world. However, there was nothing they could do about it. The drifting cloud realm only had that level of talent. There were only so many benefits that it could give them. Xiaoyang, I have high hopes for you. I have an important matter here that I would like to invite you to participate in. But your words reminded me of something. When the time comes, I will decide whether to discuss it with you after you come out of the tomb of the God of Sin, the Emperor God said with a slight smile. Hearing this, Xiao Yang's brows furrowed slightly. In his heart, he was also wondering what kind of big matter it was. But now that he thought about it, he had only just stepped into King Wu's 8th level. This kind of strength was equivalent to a drop in the ocean in the divine world. Even if you are the champion of the competition, an invincible existence among the 8th stage, but compared to a 9th stage, you are still far from it. Therefore, under such circumstances, Xiaoyang really needed to think about this matter. It was conceivable that the decision would be made after he came out of the divine tomb. Most likely, that would be the time to decide how high his position in the God Emperor's heart was. As for what exactly would happen, it was also very difficult to figure out. As the saying goes, things will go straight when the time comes. It was naturally meaningless to spend too much effort worrying about these things now. Therefore, Xiaoyang was not a mediocre person. He would not go to the extent of worrying about it. God Emperor, I don't need the prize. Is it possible to make an exception and add a place for unrivaled God to the tomb of the gods? Xiaoyang cupped his fists and asked in a low voice. It could be said that this matter had always been a knot in Xiao Yang's heart. He even minded it very much. Although he did not know if there would be a chance, he still wanted to give it a try. Perhaps the God Emperor would agree? A faint smile appeared at the corner of Shen Qian's mouth. He knew very well that Xiao Yang's request would not be agreed to. However, it was enough for him to have such thoughts. Moreover, not only did he have such thoughts, but he even said it out loud. This could be said to be a rare and commendable point. Therefore, the God Emperor was very satisfied. However, when he thought about how his eldest son might miss the opportunity to open the divine tomb of the gods this time, he could only sigh. At most, he would enter the divine tomb of the gods 1,000 years later. What was wrong with that? Therefore, although it was a little regretful, it could not be denied. After all, some people had to pay a price for their momentary emotions. You don't have to worry about this. Everyone has their own path. Moreover, you said that the rules cannot be broken. Otherwise, when the time comes, I will open the door for you. Will there be any decency left? The God Emperor said indifferently. For a moment, Xiaoyang felt helpless in his heart. However, since the God Emperor had put it this way, it was indeed difficult for him to refute. Then, with a flip of the God Emperor's hand, a treasured sword appeared in his hand with a long hum. The sword looked a little unusual. Half of the sword was silver-white in color and looked extremely sharp, while the other half was vermilion in color and looked like rising flames. This sword is called the Thunderfire Divine Sword. It's the prize for this grand competition, the God Emperor said indifferently. Looking at the sword, Xiaoyang could feel two auras. One was lightning and the other was fire. When these two auras fused into one sword, its power was even more extraordinary. Moreover, the two elements had the effect of complementing each other. It was extraordinary. Previously, Xiaoyang could not accept the Imperial Heaven Mystic Earth chessboard. However, since the Thunderfire Divine Sword was the prize for this grand competition, he could accept it calmly. Then, the God Emperor casually tossed the sword to Xiaoyang without the slightest reluctance. Xiaoyang did not stand on ceremony and accepted it directly. He cupped his fists and said, "Thank you, God Emperor." The God Emperor rolled his eyes at Xiaoyang with an unpleasant expression. Then, after the scholar in green chatted with the young man for a while, he let him leave. The scholar in green sat in front of the chessboard and looked at the game in front of him with an uncertain expression. Shen Qian immediately sat in front of the scholar. The game between them had yet to end. However, he was also in a bit of a dilemma because he was only a few moves away from losing the entire game. "Brother, are you really going to invite that kid to participate in that matter?" Shen Qian asked after pondering for a long time. When he said this, Shen Qian felt that it was rather funny. King Wu was a rank 8. How much help could he be? Moreover, the realm of gods was so powerful. What did it matter if there was one more or one less young man? The scholar in green chuckled and said, "After 100 years, do you think he'll still be King Wu?" Moreover, You and I don't know what kind of opportunities he'll encounter in the tomb of the gods. Sometimes no one knew what kind of changes would happen. However, sometimes having an extra chess piece was not a bad thing. Who knew there might be some unexpected surprises at that time? That would be a gain. Moreover, doesn't Wushuang think highly of him? The God Emperor said with a smile. Xin Qian lowered his head and did not speak. He was still indecisive. Chapter 1646. After returning from the palace, Xiaoyang returned to Shen Wushuang's courtyard. On the way back, Yang Sun did not ask about what had happened in the palace, not even a word about it. After all, even if you asked about these things, you might not get a response. Moreover, there were some things that he was not supposed to know. If he could let them know, he would not be isolated from the outside world. Therefore, Yang Sun only asked Xiaoyang a few words of concern. He told him that the tomb of the god of sin was about to open and that he should focus on recovering his condition so that he would not be unable to fight for his opportunity after entering the tomb of the god of sin due to his poor condition. All this while the god of sin had not only relied on its unique advantages to produce countless King Wu rank 8 powerhouses, but also the god of sin. The tomb of the god of sin was also an important part of it. When it opened once in 1,000 years, some people would obtain great opportunities and improve further. Take the current King Wu rank 9 almighties in the god of sin as an example. More than 95% of them broke through their shackles after obtaining opportunities in the tomb of the god of sin. People like Princess Mingzhu, who had achieved rank 9 with her monstrous talent, were extremely rare. It could even be said that in the vast god of sin, there was only one Princess Mingzhu. Of course, there were also unlucky people who did not obtain anything in the tomb of the god of sin and even lost their lives in there. As the saying went, opportunities and risks coexisted. No one could escape this. Naturally, Xiaoyang knew this very well. Therefore, he needed to be fully prepared before entering the tomb of the god of sin. After thinking about it for a long time, he withdrew from those guesses. With a shift of his mind, the red and white divided sword appeared in his hand. The Thunder Fire Divine Sword was the prize of the god of sin's grand contest. Before he left, the Divine Emperor also specially instructed him that the Thunder Fire Divine Sword was extraordinary and that he needed to carefully comprehend it in order to understand the profoundness within it. The Thunder Fire Divine Sword was also a genuine mid-grade saint-level magic treasure. It was extremely rare and could be considered the highest grade magic treasure in Xiaoyang's possession. In the future, if he could embed the remaining 2 silent thunder beads onto the silver lightning spear, the spear would have a chance to advance to the saint grade middle rank. However, this was a matter for the future. After all, Xiaoyang already had a mid-grade saint-level magic artifact in his hands. So, he was not in a hurry to do this. What's more, the Silent Thunder Pearl was still quite useful to him. It had to be said that the Divine Realm was really very generous. They didn't even blink when they took out a mid-grade saint-level artifact. This must be a display of wealth. Throwing away 1,000 gold coins was probably not enough to describe such extravagance. As for the Emperor Heaven Mysterious Earth chessboard, it was even more tempting. However, Xiaoyang did not dare to accept it. As for what the Emperor God was planning in his heart, Xiaoyang was naturally not very clear. However, he was certain that things were not that simple. As the saying goes, gifts blind the eyes. Moreover, the Emperor God had clearly stated that it was a meeting gift for entering the divine realm. Therefore, Xiaoyang did not dare to accept it. Even if it was a simple gift, it was too precious to accept in a situation where there was no friendship between them. Immediately after, Xiaoyang cut his finger with the Thunder Fire Divine Sword and a drop of blood dripped down. Immediately, flames and lightning flashed one after another. The drop of blood essence also split into 2 and entered from different places. In an instant, it disappeared without a trace. Following that, Xiaoyang's consciousness directly entered the Thunderfire Divine Sword. The higher the grade of the magic treasure, the easier it was for it to give birth to a weapon spirit. Even though the Thunderfire Divine sword did not have a weapon spirit, from the Emperor God's words, he could tell that there were probably some unknown secrets in the sword. Therefore, he could feel it now and find out some clues. As for what kind of mysteries there were, he needed to experience it personally to be able to feel it. Moreover, what Xiaoyang was doing now was to make the Thunderfire Divine sword recognize him as its master. When the time came, he would be able to use it as he wished. If he could refine the Thunderfire Divine sword before entering the Divine Tomb, then there would be no lack of one more life-saving trump card. Why not? After his consciousness entered the sword, he immediately saw a sea of fire that was constantly burning. The fire was fierce and unparalleled. Its power was comparable to the heavenly fire, as expected of a mid-grade sacred level magic treasure. Just half of the elements were already so terrifying and powerful. Even though Xiaoyang's consciousness was relatively strong and could withstand a blow from the Emperor God, he now felt the terrifying heat. It was even a little unbearable. However, it was still within the acceptable range. It seemed to be a very good choice to use it to temper his soul. However, he could not stay here for long. The flames contained an aura of destruction, not nourishment. After feeling half of the effects, Xiaoyang's consciousness gradually endured and continued to move forward. When he received the inheritance of the true Lord, Xiaoyang had already experienced the pain of the black fire tempering his soul. Therefore, he had a certain resistance to the sword fire. It could even be said that the power of the sword fire was really inferior to the black fire. Soon, Xiaoyang arrived at the junction. On one side, there was a raging sea of fire, and on the other side, there was a rolling thunder pool. Those thunderbolts looked relatively mild without much change. They were very docile. Compared to the sea of fire on this side, it was not just a little bit different. One side was quiet, and the other side was a rising sea of fire. It could be said that it formed a very sharp contrast. Immediately, Xiaoyang's consciousness also immediately floated over. Suddenly, the incomparably silent thunder pool began to surge. The rolling thunder was like an angry beast that had been awakened from its ancient slumber. It lost its temper and roared endlessly. The thunder seemed to have sensed the invasion of an external enemy and immediately bombarded Xiaoyang's consciousness like a swarm of bees. Countless thunderbolts seemed to have shocking power and were determined to kill the invading enemy. They did not hesitate at all. It was as if they would only stop after the wisp of consciousness was destroyed. Suddenly, the sea of fire on the other side became restless. Fire dragons rushed into the sky and attacked the invading wisp of consciousness. The fire dragons and thunderbolts had already completely sealed off the wisp of consciousness. There was no way it could escape at all. It could not escape even if it had wings. The two forces were like brilliant heavenly power and could not be resisted. Suddenly, Xiaoyang's body twitched. Chapter 1647. The thunderbolt and the fire dragon each carried divine power. It was as if heaven and earth were trembling and space was about to shatter. Among them, there was also an unparalleled sharpness of sword intent. It directly attacked the seemingly weak divine consciousness. In an instant, the thunderbolt and the fire dragon collided together. That incomparably weak divine consciousness was on the verge of collapsing and being annihilated. Under the bombardment and burning, the divine consciousness became much weaker. However, the sword intent did not stop. Instead, it rushed out of the lightning pool and the sea of fire and rushed out of the divine sword. The thunderbolt and the fire dragon immediately turned into two sword intents and rushed into Xiaoyang's body, quickly entering his sea of consciousness. It had always been a big deal for a magic weapon to recognize a master. This was especially true for those spiritual artifacts. They would choose their owners on their own. If the owner did not have the ability to suppress them, they would most likely be devoured by the artifact and even lose their lives because of it. This was a common occurrence. This was also the reason why some low-level cultivators, after obtaining a high-grade magic weapon, did not dare to drip blood on it to recognize it as its master. although they were happy. Having the opportunity to obtain a good magic weapon was indeed a wonderful thing. It made people very happy and excited. However, if they lost their rationality and forcefully went through with the process, it would be an unwise choice. They might even die because of it. The more powerful the magic weapon, the more tyrannical and powerful its counterattack would be. If one was not careful, they might not be able to withstand it. If they did not have enough means, or if the cultivator's divine consciousness was slightly weaker, even if they obtained a good magic weapon, they would not be able to match it. In the end, they would only end up not being able to enjoy it and could only regretfully stop. The two sword intents suddenly rushed into a sea of consciousness. Xiao Yang's heart was filled with amazement. This divine emperor was really willing to make a move. Since a mid-grade sage-level magic weapon was so domineering that it needed to verify the aptitude of its master, it was enough to show how strong the moldable ability of this item was. In fact, if this item was properly nurtured, it might even be able to increase its grade. Many magic weapons were made by famous masters and were of high grades. However, there were even more magic weapons that could only become divine weapons after being nourished by one master after another. It was even more so for magic tools of higher grades. Unless it was a natural occurrence, there were not that many natural artifacts in the world. This was just like how innate jade was pitifully rare. Many of the incomparably exquisite pieces of jade had gone through countless carvings before they could have their appearance. After the two sword chis of different natures invaded Xiaoyang's sea of consciousness, they quickly turned into thunderbolts and fire dragons, raging inside. The violent and destructive aura was extremely terrifying, and it was mixed with extremely sharp sword intent. It caused Xiaoyang to immediately feel extreme pain. His brows knit together tightly, and he was unable to conceal the pain on his face. Xiaoyang immediately activated the technique to suppress the two violent sword chis. There was only one way to tame them, and that was to suppress them by force. This was also a stage that one had to go through before dripping blood to recognize their master. Only by letting these two sword chis recognize his strength would they be willing to submit and recognize him as their master. In this regard, Xiaoyang was even more attentive. Such an unforeseen event made him very happy. Moreover, the stronger these two sword chis were, the more it could prove the power of the magic weapon. Even among magic weapons of the same grade, there were different grades. After all, magic weapons also had differences in aptitude, and there was no difference between them and human cultivators. After all, this had a lot to do with the selection of materials. Moreover, the material would also determine how far a magic weapon could go in the end. Not long after, Xiaoyang's face kept changing. Just like a sword, one side of his face was scarlet red like fire, while the other side was extremely pale. There was not the slightest bit of color on his face. The two sword chis were constantly crisscrossing, intertwining and killing in the sea of consciousness, constantly destroying and destroying. Fortunately, Xiaoyang's sea of consciousness had become abnormally tough after being tempered thousands of times. He was still somewhat confident that he could suppress it. Moreover, Xiaoyang could even withstand a soul attack from the divine emperor. Could it be that he could not withstand the test of this magic weapon? If that was the case, then it would really be a joke. However, the pain was difficult to hide. The two different sword chis, in addition to the changes in attributes, were difficult to understand. Therefore, suppressing them was naturally a very difficult task. Time slowly passed, and some inexplicable wounds began to appear on Xiaoyang's body. Those wounds were as if they were cut by the sword chis. After a full hour, the two sword chis left Xiaoyang's body and returned to the divine sword. After a long time, Xiaoyang slowly opened his eyes, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He looked at the thunderfire divine sword in front of him, and his eyes were full of satisfaction. Obviously, he had successfully recognized a master. From then on, the sword was his. Unless Xiaoyang died or took the initiative to wipe out the divine consciousness in the divine sword, No one else would be able to use the Thunderfire Divine Sword. Moreover, Xiaoyang had also found the place that the Divine Emperor had mentioned that he needed to pay attention to. This was indeed a pleasant surprise. It had to be said that the Thunderfire Divine Sword was indeed an extraordinary existence. Even though it was only a middle sacred grade magic weapon, it was probably a top-notch existence. That was because the Thunderfire Divine Sword came with a sword technique. A sword had a set of exclusive sword techniques. This sword technique was called the Thunderfire Sword Technique, and it was specially used to match the mysteries of the sword and maximize its power. Due to the fact that it had two completely different attributes, it was still a headache to maximize the power of this sword. However, there was such an exclusive sword technique that matched the profoundness of the technique, allowing it to unleash its power to the maximum. This was no ordinary technique. It could be said that the sword and the sword technique complemented each other, and neither could be missing. Between the two, no matter which one was missing, the final power would be greatly reduced. "Looks like the gift the Divine Emperor gave me this time is not light," Xiaoyang muttered and laughed helplessly. Such a sword and sword technique could be said to be an extremely rare existence. As an outsider, he could easily get the weakest item in the grade as the prize. However, what fell into his hands was a top-notch existence. Chapter 1648. Many artifacts could be seen from their appearance, and one could roughly tell what grade they were. However, some artifacts required a deeper understanding. Only after the artifact had recognized its owner would one be able to understand its profundity and power and how precious it was. Take the Thunderfire Divine Sword, for example. Although it was a mid-grade, saint-grade artifact, it could be nourished and even had a sword technique to go with it. It was obvious how precious it was. Moreover, the sword technique that could go with it would be able to display a powerful might. However, it was a pity that the sword technique was incomplete. Although Xiaoyang had never cultivated it, he knew that it was incomplete. The sword technique at the back did not appear in the sword, and he did not know how it was missing. As for whether an emperor god could erase the sword technique at the back, it was still unknown. However, this was fine. The sword technique at the front was already strong and domineering enough. Perhaps it was because of this lack that the Thunderfire Divine Sword seemed like a fly in the ointment. However, this was something that could not be helped. After all, with the baptism of time, the inheritance would change, and it was normal for it to be incomplete. There were only a few chapters in the Thunderfire Sword technique, and they were about how to control and use the power of thunder and fire. The Thunderfire Sword technique only had the method to control thunder and fire separately. As for how to combine the two elements together to unleash the greatest power, that was the missing part. Perhaps it was because the most important part was missing, so the realm of the gods felt that this item was a bit useless. Therefore, they used it as a prize. Perhaps if someone held it, they would have the opportunity to comprehend it? There were too many ways to do it, or the design of the mechanism, but there was no need to think so much about it. To others, perhaps they would feel that it was not beautiful, that it was missing the most important part, and it was really dissatisfying. However, Xiaoyang's thoughts were much simpler. This was a mid-grade saint-grade artifact, after all, and its power was extraordinary. As for how to unleash the power of this divine sword to the maximum, Xiaoyang was not worried about this. He was also very confident that he could comprehend and write down the sword technique after he mastered the Thunderfire Sword technique. After all, it was not as if he had never done such a thing before. Or it could be said that the Thunderfire Sword art was only a basic sword art. As for what kind of powerful move would be unleashed in the end, that would depend on each person's comprehension and luck. After all, everyone had a different understanding, and they could create the most suitable sword technique for themselves because of it. After thoroughly pondering over the key points, Xiaoyang once again began to calm down and comprehend the profound meaning of the sword skill. If he could comprehend the Thunderfire Sword technique before entering the Tomb of the Gods, he would have one more trump card at his disposal. Even if it wasn't a complete sword technique, it was still a mid-grade saint-level artifact with boundless power. In the following period of time, Xiaoyang could be said to be completely oblivious to the outside world and was completely immersed in cultivating the sword technique. Because he knew how terrifying the power was, he did not slack off in the slightest. In addition, the opening of the divine tomb was getting closer and closer, so Xiaoyang had to speed up. The current fairy's capital had begun to enter a state of solemnity. Many people were very clear that this time there would be many carps leaping over the dragon's gate to achieve a high position in the future. Therefore, those who had a high chance of reaching the top naturally became the target of some ancient forces. Even if they could not, they would consider forming an alliance or even leaving a favor. After all, Xiaoyang could continue to be in the limelight in the realm of the gods, where King Wu was rank 8. It was impossible for him to not have a stronger cultivator to hold the fort. It could even be said that the forces in the realm of the gods would change once every 1,000 years. It could be said that the realm of the gods had entered a more fixed pattern. The realm of the gods was constantly nurturing rank 8 King Wu powerhouses in Fairy's capital, while the divine tomb was creating peak cultivators. Cultivators who had resolutely broken through to rank 9 in Fairy's capital with their own talent and hard work could be said to be very rare. Looking at the past tens of thousands of years, it was pitifully few. It was only in the past few thousand years that the number of cultivators who could break through to rank 9 without entering the divine tomb could be counted on one's fingers, even though there were more than before. Moreover, every person who did it was an extremely terrifying existence. For example, the current Princess Mingzhu stepped into rank 9 with her talent. Because of this, the praise that Princess Mingzhu received was incomparably high. It was very likely that she would become the first empress in the history of the realm of the gods. Even if it was that realm, many people felt that Princess Mingzhu would definitely step into it. It was just a matter of time. The time to enter the divine tomb could be said to be approaching bit by bit. Everyone was very much looking forward to it. 7 days passed, and Xiaoyang also withdrew from the state of comprehension. From the satisfied look in his eyes, it could be seen that he had succeeded. In these 7 days, Xiaoyang had more or less comprehended the Thunderfire sword technique. Although he didn't know it by heart and could use it easily, he could already feel that he had achieved great mastery. No matter how familiar he was with it, it still required actual combat to be able to do so. To be able to comprehend a martial technique to its peak with just comprehension was simply too monstrous. Moreover, the higher the grade of a martial technique, the harder it was to comprehend it. Many people would even need to spend a few years to understand the key points within it. However, Xiaoyang only used 7 days based on his own experience, which could be said to be very short. With a thought, the very strange-looking sword suddenly emitted a white light and a scarlet light. In an instant, the two sword intents also surged out directly. They continuously spiraled in the air and continuously grew stronger. The two sword intents quickly collided together. Immediately, lightning flashed and flames intertwined with each other. Very quickly, the sword intents rapidly condensed together and once again entered the sword without any sound. Xiaoyang exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. The smile on the corner of his mouth became even wider. Just now, he was trying to combine the two powers. Although he didn't succeed, he still felt some of the knack within it. I didn't expect you to be able to comprehend the true essence within 7 days. I'm sure if others knew about it, their jaws would drop in shock. At this moment, a candid voice was heard. This voice sounded very familiar. Within the candid voice, there was a trace of naughtiness.